be expanded, or rather to renew that mandate for a further term until June 19th of 2024 to enable it to complete the task that it was set up to do. And on the key agenda for today, that is the notice of motion on the budget policy statement. You can see, let's confirm whether there is quorum.
Honorable Senator, whose child is that? Clerk, can you proceed to call the first order? Honorable Kalwale, please just approach the chair as the clerk does that.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers. Order number 6, notices of motion.
The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Finance and Budget. Majority, can you proceed if you have instructions to do that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, apologies on behalf of the Chair of Finance and the whole committee. We have been in session from 7 in the morning. We've just ended. I therefore rise, Mr. Speaker, to give notice of the following motion, namely a report of the Standing Committee on the Finance and Budget on the 2024 Budget Policy Statement, that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2024 Budget Policy Statement laid on the table of this Senate on Tuesday, the 5th March 2024, and pursuant to Section 25(7) of the Public Finance Management Act and Standing Order number 186-8, the Senate approves the 2024 Budget Policy Statement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Chairperson, Ad hoc Committee on the compensation to the Kenya victims of the 1998 bombing. Senator Kavindu or any member of that committee may proceed to give notice.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion. That aware that at the sitting of the Senate held on 29th June 2023, the Senate resolves to establish an ad hoc committee to investigate the compensation to the Kenyan victims of the 1998 bombing of the United States of America Embassy in Nairobi and report back to the House within 3 months of the establishment. Further aware that on 3rd October 2023 and on 15th November 2023, the Senate resolved to review the mandate of the ad hoc committee for a further period not exceeding 45 days and a further period not exceeding 100 days from 10th November 2023, respectively, to establish the committee to finalize, to enable the committee to finalize and table its report in the Senate on or before 18th February 2024. Appreciating that the committee has a lot of work to execute before conclusion of its expiry and reporting to the Senate. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves to renew the mandate of the ad hoc committee for a further period not exceeding 100 days from 11th March 2024 and to table its final report in the Senate on or before 19th June 2024.
Next order, clerk.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
No, honorable senators, we had scheduled 7 questions for response by 3 CSs today, this morning. That is CS Transport, CS Treasury, and CS Gender, Culture, Arts and Heritage. However, at a sitting yesterday of the SBC, we did consider 2 letters, one from the CS Treasury and one from the CS Transport, indicating that they will not be able to be present today for purposes of responding to their queries. And the reasons they gave were found to be valid by SBC, and therefore those questions relating to the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Treasury will be rescheduled to a later date. Now, this morning, of course, that then leaves us with the CS Gender, Culture, Arts and Heritage. Now, this morning I received a letter signed by the Honorable CS Aisha Jumwa, indicating that due to conflicting schedule, she will not be able to attend this session for purposes of responding to the question relating to her ministry. Therefore, honorable senators, we do not have a CS this morning to respond to these questions. The question time, therefore, naturally collapses, and we shall move to transact other business or other businesses as scheduled in the order paper. Yes, Honorable Kathuri.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for that communication, which I'm not contesting. But Honorable Speaker, you know this is a house which has a lot of work to do. And Mr. Speaker, when scheduling this business, there is a lot of considerations that is done, especially at the SBC, Senate Business Committee. So, Mr. Speaker, when our CS postpones appearing before the House this very morning, when we have scheduled business already, to me, Mr. Speaker, I think if we go that route, then we'll be disrespecting this Honorable House. So, Mr. Speaker, there must be some time frame that the CS at least should communicate. And also the reason that the CS is giving that is a conflicting schedule of activities that she has is not good enough. Mr. Speaker, I realize that schedule has been affected by the end of state, then that we can consider. But if it is our own programs, Honorable Speaker, I think we should really not go that route, and this House should not be very comfortable when the CS suspends or communicates in the very morning that he or she is supposed to appear before the Senate, and then we take that matter lying down, Mr. Speaker. This House must be respected. And Mr. Speaker, if we continue allowing this kind of business or this kind of manner, then, Mr. Speaker, nobody will ever respect this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, with a lot of pain that honorable senators woke up very early in the morning to beat the traffic, especially this Gong Road, Honorable Senator for Nairobi. You should really raise that matter because, you know, most of us live in your county, but we are really struggling to get in the morning. Those are the matters that really need to be discussed. So, Mr. Speaker, we sacrifice a lot, even our schedules, our other programs, so that we can be in this house as hard as possible to wait for the honorable CSEs. But when they frustrate us after doing all this sacrifice, Mr. Speaker, I think this is not honorable enough. I know the CS loans communicated early enough. The CS, which is the other CS? Treasury, National Treasury. During the communication, maybe before yesterday. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we, personally, as a member for Meru County, Senator for Meru County, not the Deputy Speaker, so that I don't conflict myself or your office. I'm talking as the Senator for Meru County. I think this CSA should do better than that, Honorable Speaker. I thank you.
Senator Sifuna.
Mheshimiwa Spika, nilikuwa nimekinoa Kiswahili changu kwa ajili ya ujio wa Waziri Aisha Jumwa ili tuweze kupatana moja kwa moja. Kwa hivyo utaniruhusu nizungumze Kiswahili hicho ili kisiende bure. Hata kama hajafika. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwanza nimjulishe ndugu yangu seneta wa Meru kwamba nimefanya kikao pamoja na mwenyekiti wa kamati ya usafiri Mheshimiwa Karungo Wathangwa na yule ambaye ni balozi wa nchi ya Japan kuhusu shida za trafiki katika barabara ya Ngong Road, na ametuahidi kwamba serikali ya Japan kupitia ushirikiano na serikali ya Kenya itazindua mfumo wa mabasi ya kasi katika barabara hiyo ya Ngong Road, na natumai kwamba itapelekea wewe kupata nafuu unapofika kazini hapa katika bunge la Senate. Jambo la pili, Mheshimiwa Spika, ni kwamba mimi ni baadhi ya wale ambao wanakaa katika ile kamati ya SBC ama huduma za bunge hili. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa kweli tunapata msukumo sana kutoka kwa hao wenzetu ambao tunawakilisha katika kamati ile, kwa sababu ukiangalia ratiba ya masuala ambayo yalikuwa yashughulikiwe leo hii, Mheshimiwa Enoch Wambua ametoka Kitui leo asubuhi ili aweze kuuliza masuala yake kwa yule waziri wa usafiri. Kuna masuala mengi hata mimi nilikuwa nataka nimuulize yule ambaye ni waziri wa masuala ya kifedha kuhusu mfumo mzima wa e-citizen ambao Wakenya wengi wanatusukuma tufanye kitu juu yake. Kwa hivyo ni jambo la kuvunja moyo sana, haswa kwa waziri Aisha Jumwa ambaye nilimuona juzi, Mheshimiwa Spika, akiwa maeneo ya kule Western, akiwarai wakazi wa Vihiga kutoruhusu viongozi fulani kuzungumza iwapo maoni yao yatakinzana na maoni yake ama maoni ya watu wa mrengo wake. Na nilishtuka sana kwa sababu najua mawaziri wafai kujiingiza katika siasa, na aliibua hisia kali sana kwangu kwa sababu alizungumzia swala ambalo lilikuwa linanihusu wakati moja nikiwa katika eneo bunge lake.
Senator wa Nairobi.
Mheshimiwa Spika, namaliza.
Hoja ambayo iko mbele ya Seneti kwa sasa,
naam,
ni kutokuwepo kwa mawaziri. Walioyafanya wiki iliyopita ama mwezi uliopita hayaambatani kamwe na hoja ambayo iko mbele yetu.
Nimekuelewa Mheshimiwa Spika.
Uzungumze pengine unashtumu vikali ama
ndo nachanga huo ukali, yani Spika, tafadhali.
Unaanzia mbali sana.
Kwa dakika moja tu nimalize.
Umeanzia mbali.
Yani kitu ambacho nilikuwa nataka kiibuke wazi ni kwamba mawaziri hawa wanapata nafasi ya kufanya mambo mengine, lakini shughuli ya bunge hawatilii kipaumbele. Alikuwepo kwenye mazishi, nimetoka kwenye station ya redio ya KBC, wananiambia alikuwepo jana na yeye katika kituo hicho. Kama anapata fursa ya kwenda mazishini, kukemea viongozi, kwenda katika vyombo vya habari, kwa nini asije hapa na sisi pia tupate fursa ya kuzungumza naye? Kwa sababu dadangu Gloria, Mheshimiwa Senator Gloria Orwoba, wiki iliyopita alitukemea sana, haswa viongozi wa vyama ambao walishiriki ile mdahalo ama dialogue ambayo ilikuwepo, ya kwamba tuliwacha masuala ya kina mama nyuma. Nilikuwa nataka waziri aje hapa adhirishe kwamba si kwa kukosa kuwasilisha hoja zetu kama viongozi wa ODM, bali kuna masuala ambayo yalikuwa yanafanyika ndani ya wizara yake. Kwa hivyo ni yeye pekee alikuwa anaweza kuniondoa katika mtego uliokuwa umetegwa na Mheshimiwa Gloria. Lakini sasa hayupo hapa. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa, mimi nataka nikemee vikali kukosa kuja mbele ya bunge kwa Mheshimiwa Aisha Jumwa, haswa kwa sababu wenzake wengine walikuwa na ile courtesy ya kuandika barua kwa spika. Heshima, asante Mheshimiwa Spika, walikuwa na ile heshima kwa bunge hili kuandika barua kusema kwamba ama katesi, naambiwa unaweza sema katesi Mheshimiwa Spika wakaandika barua kujulisha wabunge kwamba hawatafika. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, nataka nikuombe swala moja tu. Wakati ambapo tulikuwa katika mkutano wa SBC niliuliza swala, je, kuna njia gani ya kuwajulisha wale ambao wameuliza maswala mapema kwamba maswala yao hayatapata kujibiwa kwa sababu waziri ameandika barua? Lakini nikaelezwa kwamba kutakuwa na ugumu kwa sababu wenzetu hawa wakiambiwa kwamba waziri haji na wao pia hawaji. Tunataka tu tungependa Mheshimiwa Kadhuri Murungi apambane na hali yake kule Ngong Road, afike hapa hata kama waziri hayuko tuweze ku...
Senator Wameru, hoja ya nidhamu yako ni...
Niko kwenye hoja ya nidhamu.
Hii imeruhusiwa, hii hoja yangu imeruhusiwa vizuri na Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, sio vema kiongozi seneta wa Nairobi, yale mambo yanazungumzwa kwa mkutano SBC, ni bora kweli aje hapa kwa seneti aweze kuweka haya maneno wazi, yale yanazungumzwa kwa kikao cha SBC. Na mbona anatoa siri ya kamati ya SBC, anakuja kutoa hizo siri hapa kwa sababu Bwana Spika.
Asante sana Senator Wameru. Senator Wameru, utendakazi wa seneti unafanyika katika ukumbi huu na pia katika kamati zetu, na hakuna siri ambayo tuweza kuificha, maanake kazi ile yote ni kazi ya seneti. Kwa hivyo seneta wa Nairobi amefanya vyema kuweka paruanja ile hali ilivyokuwa kule. Endelea umalize hoja mchango.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kuniopoa kutoka kwa mikono ya Mheshimiwa Wameru. Mheshimiwa, kwa kweli mimi ni mwakilishi pale SBC wa hawa wenzangu hapa, na ni muhimu kwamba yote ambayo yanaendelea pale tuweze kuwajuza, kwa sababu ulivyosema wewe mwenyewe hamna siri. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, mimi nataka kuomba tu ya kwamba kuwe na mfumo, hata kama arafa itaandikwa kwa yule seneta ambaye alikuwa ameuliza swala mwenyewe, pasi na kuweka paruanja ulivyosema, lakini mwenye kuuliza maswala hayo ajulishe kwamba kwa bahati mbaya ama kwa sababu moja ama nyingine yule waziri ambaye ulikuwa unataka kumuuliza maswala hatafika leo, ili watu waweze kujipanga Mheshimiwa Spika. Lakini ni vizuri tuwe hapa kwa ajili ya shughuli zingine za bunge, na natumai kwamba kikao hiki hakitatibuka kwa huu utovu wa nidhamu unaoonyeshwa na wale mawaziri kama Aisha Jumwa. Nakushukuru Mheshimiwa Spika.
Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, kwani wewe utanifundisha vile nitazungumza katika Senate?
Senator Boni, don't engage your colleagues.
Thank you.
Talk through the chair.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I have this inkling that the minister who has failed to come rudely this morning is holed somewhere following these proceedings now, just to see how we are going to handle her case. And I want to request you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that you allow the House to exercise Standing Order number 51D. And because the minister is watching these proceedings, 51D, Mr. Speaker, states that the Senate may, where a cabinet secretary fails without reasonable cause to appear and respond to questions under this part, move a motion to censure the cabinet secretary. This minister is now ripe for motion of censure because she has never appeared before this House. And severally, we have asked her to come and respond to matters of grave national importance. She's a letdown to the structure of government. She's failing the executive, and with due respect, without being seen to be using the name of the president, I put it to the president that this is dereliction of duty. This minister is not fit to hold public office. If she was, she would not have failed to find time to be here this morning, and last week find time to go and consult with the leader of the opposition in waiting at his Capitol Hill office. Why does she choose to transact matters on gender, 2/3 rule, at Capitol Hill, and she cannot come and appeal the same, for the same in this House? Mr. Speaker, you must use the vast powers in your possession. You protect the integrity of the Senate. A minister cannot believe that she can hold us at ransom. There are so many young women. There are so many middle-aged women. There are so many women of advanced age, Mr. Speaker, who are fit to serve this country as minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise under Standing Order number 105 on statement of fact, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the good senator from Malinya, the senator of Kakamega, has indicated that when the minister went to Capitol Hill, the minister was transacting on particular agenda, which he has said was agenda about women. Can he prove to this House that is privy to the conversation that took the minister to Capitol Hill, whether there were formal conversations or informal conversation, and whether indeed he is privy to the agenda?
Senator Eddy,
yes.
Let's have time to transact business. You know, there was a press conference after the meeting, and everything is in the public domain. So, just conclude, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, I want to appeal to the young senator from Migori.
Don't appeal, just proceed to conclude your
Yes,
remarks.
that if we must defend certain positions, let us defend them reasonably.
I've already told him that, Senator.
Thank you.
Just proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we worked so hard to form this government. You and I, and many others, we were not working hard so as to allow people in office, people who would then, Mr. Speaker, be tiptoeing in and out of office. We wanted people to stamp their authority so that our women, in fact, I believe, what is the name of, yes, Senator Gloria, I think she's the youngest in the House. She should be appointed the minister in place of this mama who doesn't have any idea of how important it is to appear before this House. Oh, Miraj is the youngest. She was quarreling me, that's why I did not.
If you're done, kindly take your seat. Senator Enoch Wambua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to condemn in the strongest terms possible this trend that is actually gaining root in this House, that cabinet secretaries decide whether to attend committee meetings or plenary, and they know somehow that they can get away with it. Mr. Speaker, I have argued elsewhere, and I want to argue here, that we are the people, we are the leaders, to give this House the dignity that is due to it. And it will not happen, Mr. Speaker, if we entertain a situation where honorable senators wake up early on Wednesday morning, fully aware that they are coming to interact with cabinet secretaries on matters related to dockets that these cabinet secretaries had. And out of 3, not a single CS shows up. The Speaker, in other jurisdictions, something would give. In other jurisdictions, the Speaker, the chair would stamp the authority of this House and demand that if there is a cabinet secretary within the boundaries of this country, they must appear before this House in the next 30 minutes, and that would happen. Mr. Speaker, this casual way of dealing with the Senate, and we are not even overreaching our mandate as a Senate. The Constitution, not even our standing orders, the Constitution is very clear. Article 153, on the decisions, responsibility, and accountability of the cabinet. It states very clearly in black and white that a cabinet secretary, I'm reading verbatim, Article 153(3), that a cabinet secretary shall attend before a committee of the National Assembly or the Senate when required by the committee and answer any question concerning a matter for which the cabinet secretary is responsible. Mr. Speaker, that statement is explicit as explicit can get. The decision by the cabinet secretary for roads, that's where I'm going to begin, because I have 2 questions that are listed for a response from the CS responsible for roads. Mr. Speaker, the CS for roads knows very well, wherever he is, that the matters that I'm raising, those questions, are matters that he addressed himself to when he was a senator in this House representing Elgeyo Marakwet. Now he is a CS, he can make a decision on the compensation of the people from Kibwezi all the way to Mwingi, persons affected by a road project, and he just decides to stay away. The Speaker, I take great exception to that decision. Lastly, on the matter of Senate CS for gender, Aisha Jumwa. Mr. Speaker, I was really excited about today's sitting because there is a matter that we would have put to rest today. There have been accusations and counter-accusations from our honorable lady senators and from the women of this country about the place of the 2-third gender rule in the NADCO report. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to have a face-to-face conversation with the CS responsible for that matter on the floor of this House, so that she can tell us what role she played. Mr. Speaker, we would have put this matter to rest today, because it is her who approached the NADCO committee and said, let us remove this matter from your discussion because there is something that I am doing and I'm very sure I will succeed. That's a matter that we would have held a conversation around today, Mr. Speaker, and settled that matter. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm still pursuing the line that because you have the power, Mr. Speaker, and that power is given to you by the supreme law of the land, to demand that in the next 30 minutes, CS Aisha Jumwa makes an appearance on the floor of this Senate so that we transact that business and we get done with it. Mr. Speaker, I submit.
Senator Mungatana.
Asante sana Bwana Spika kwa kunipa nafasi na mimi nitoe maoni yangu. Bwana Spika, leo waziri wa fedha hakufika hapa Seneti, waziri wa barabara hakufika Seneti, waziri wa jinsia pia hakufika Seneti. Bwana Spika, ile kanuni ya kudumu 51D ambayo Seneta Khalwale ambaye ameitaja iko na adhabu kubwa sana kwa hawa mawaziri ambao ni kuleta hoja hapa ya kuwatoa kazini. Lakini Bwana Spika, mimi ningekuwa nimefikiria kwamba SBC wangekaa tubadilishe hii sheria ama tuiongezee na hapo chini. Mbali na kutumia nyundo kuua inzi, Bwana Spika, tungeweka kwamba iwe ni automatic ama ni mtu akikosa kufika kwa mara ya kwanza, Spika bila kuuliza swali ni $1,000,000. Mara ya pili ni $5,000,000 na mtu analipa mwenyewe, waziri analipa mwenyewe. Mara ya tatu ndio hii kanuni ya kudumu 51D iletwe hapa hoja. Na nilikuwa naomba wale wenzetu ambao wanakaa kwa SBC tutengeneze kitu ambao tunaweza kuitumia. Iwe ni automatic, sio lazima speaker akitoa ruling. Umekosa ni $1,000,000. Ukiwa umekosa mara pili ni $5,000,000. Mara ya tatu ni hoja. Iwe ni automatic, sio kitu ambao tunakuja kudebate. Hivi Bwana Speaker, tukigeuza kanuni zetu itatusaidia kupeleka message kwa hawa wenzetu ambao wamekaa kwa nafasi hizo kwamba ni lazima tuheshimu seneti na tuheshimu nafasi ambazo sisi tunafanya kwa niaba ya wananchi. Asante sana Mheshimiwa.
Senator Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with colleagues who have spoken before us that Senate does not sit here. And the fact that we amended the law to bring ministers or cabinet secretaries to the House to answer questions, that just Senate doesn't sit here in vain, and that the ministers and or cabinet secretaries must take it so seriously, and that the law should then demand, I want to agree with Senator Mugatana, that it becomes very punitive unless there is a sufficient reason, and which can only be a cabinet meeting. No other reason, or maybe even if one had proved that they are unwell. But even in that position, give notice early enough. Not the way Senator Juma has done, to give a notice, this morning, to send a letter this morning, is really ridiculous. It is disrespectful to this House. And Mr. Speaker, I urge you to stamp your authority that she be awarded 30 minutes to appear before this Senate or fail the total consequences of impeachment. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join my colleagues in expressing strongest reservations on what we should be doing. Mr. Speaker, when we amended these standing orders, it was in the interest of all people who we represent with. We don't represent ourselves, Mr. Speaker. And this habit of cabinet secretaries not appearing when required, we used to see it in committees, but it looks like we have been lax enough that they are now taking plenary for granted, Mr. Speaker. Because I think if we were aware that Cabinet Secretary of Roads, Treasury, and Gender was not appearing, Mr. Speaker, sir, then there would be no need of scheduling them on the order paper. We would be even doing motions or bills or other statements, Mr. Speaker. So it is very unfortunate that today in the morning, Mr. Speaker, we woke up very early. And yesterday I heard through rumors, Mr. Speaker, that CSS would not be appearing. I wish in the past or in future, as my brothers have suggested and sisters, colleagues, that they should communicate to us, Mr. Speaker, because you can see I'm the heaviest casualty, Mr. Speaker, because 3/4 of questions that were to be asked was through you, was truly, and the people of Nandi were glued to their TV stations, Mr. Speaker, knowing that we'll get real answers today on the status of roads, Mr. Speaker. The nation was glued that today we'll know the status of Kenya Airways and financial operations and other operations, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, many people from Kericho County would have known at the renovation and expansion of Karenga Airstrip in Kericho, Mr. Speaker. So I find it out of place, Mr. Speaker. I remember during Kibaki era, President Kibaki era, when President Kibaki used to know that you are supposed to appear before Parliament, he would prefer that you appear before Parliament before going to any other state functions, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, and we have agreed at the floor of this House before that two important functions of a cabinet secretary or executive is one is a cabinet meeting, and number two is appearing before Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is a calculated evasion of not appearing before this House, Mr. Speaker. So I request, Mr. Speaker, in future, I don't know what Senate Business Committee where you chair, you need to provide guidance, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with what senators have said. Any minister who does not appear when required by this House, Mr. Speaker, should be fined heavily. And I'm happy that the Powers and Privileges Bill passed yesterday. One question goes with 5 million, Mr. Speaker, and they pay from their own source, Mr. Speaker. So looking at my questions, the CS should have paid around 20 million, which I know some of the CSs don't have problem with, because nowadays they have a lot of cash running around, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, second and finally is on the issue of gender. I find it expressed reservations. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with, although he has left, my colleague, is it deputy or minority leader, said, Mr. Speaker, that these CSS are busy answering us in matangas, in baby showers, in bridal showers, and birthday parties, Mr. Speaker, but they cannot come and answer. For me, I have always been answered in funerals, Mr. Speaker, which I find it out of place and obnoxious, Mr. Speaker. But when I give the CS of Rose a chance to come and answer these questions on behalf of the great people of Kenya and Nandi, they don't find it convenient. But if they hear this weekend there is a function, a social function of any nature, they will hire a chopper and fly and come and answer before the people, Mr. Speaker. So we should stop taking Kenyans for fools, Mr. Speaker. We cannot operate this way, Mr. Speaker. In fact, my advice to the CSS, they should reduce even going to social gatherings and use this premium platform, Mr. Speaker, where it is organized, you answer, you clarify, you table evidence. Instead of waiting for functions to happen during weekend, Mr. Speaker, or Arambes to come and give out money and bombosal Kenyans, calaventing, perambulating, which does not help in any way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the CS of gender, I am one believer that CSI Ischa Jumwa is doing extremely well, but today I am disappointed, Mr. Speaker, because when we were debating NADCO and you are the one who guided us, and I saw some people were trying to blame you yesterday, they don't know how wise you are. I beg to forgive them on your behalf, because they are trying to blame you on the issue of NADCO, Mr. Speaker. When the NADCO report was being presented, we were told there was a tactical, calculated move by the gender ministry that they were doing somewhere mysteriously to address the issue of a third gender rule. Mr. Speaker, I woke up on behalf of all women, girls, and many others, Mr. Speaker, to come and listen to this strategy that is being employed by gender to address a third gender rule, Mr. Speaker. And you can see the number of women senators in the Senate today is quite high, Mr. Speaker, because we really wanted to find out how do we resolve this thing that has been elusive since 1994 on achieving the third gender rule. But I want to assure the women leaders, women senators, and women of this country, there is hope, because the president himself believes in a third gender rule, Mr. Speaker. So even if the Speaker, and I want to agree with my colleagues, let the CS appear in the next 30 minutes, we can suspend the House, ensure wherever she is, because I am aware, Mr. Speaker, there is no cabinet meeting today. So I am assured that there is no any other urgent thing that they can, Mr. Speaker. So why don't you suspend the House, order the CS to appear within 30 minutes, and also to come with a fine, Mr. Speaker, to ensure the senators are comfortable, so that when they are answering questions, Mr. Speaker, please, going into the future, let SBC guide us or become innovative. We are not guiding the ABC, you are the one guiding. Let us become innovative, Mr. Speaker. And I want to advise colleagues, let us, the issues of the plenary and the Senate remains here. When you want to make your comments in the press conferences and funerals and other things, please reserve it there. But don't discuss the conduct and functionality of the Speaker of the Senate. Other lower house will defend their own Speaker. Us will defend ours. So if you have a problem, please discuss it with your wife in your bedroom at night, but don't bring it out in the public. Mr. Speaker, I express strong reservations against non-appearances of CSS. I thank you.
Senator Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I want to start by saying that, Mr. Speaker, on 30th of November, 2023, the Prime Cabinet Secretary was to appear in this House. And, Mr. Speaker, if you remember, he did not appear. And colleague and esteemed senators did pronounce themselves on the issue very strongly. But it appeared like it ended there. We did not take any action. And Mr. Speaker, I empathized with you because you even had today the whip, the majority whip, inviting us to the, inviting our attention to standing order number 51D, which, Mr. Speaker, says that the Senate may, where a cabinet secretary fails, without reasonable cause, and underline the word reasonable cause, to appear and respond to questions under this part, move a motion to censure the cabinet secretary. Now, I do understand that, Mr. Speaker, the requirement of this particular standing order is to the extent that the Speaker being a neutral figure running the House cannot initiate any action under that particular standing order. And therefore, it behooves my fellow colleague senators to actually take action. So what I would have wanted to see is perhaps Senator Mungatana or Senator Boni Aluale actually taking action and coming to this House and telling us, this is my motion to censor this particular CS for disrespecting this House and taking it forward. That's the way we should be moving as a Senate. And I wanted to protect you, Mr. Speaker. Now that you have protected us so many times this entire year, may I protect you on that? But then, I also wanted to observe that we as senators elected by the people are very reasonable people. That is why the word reasonable appears in that particular standing order. And therefore, we are not malicious. To the extent that if there is any CS that takes us seriously and takes us at our own estimate of the seriousness we bring in this country as a House, then they should be able to take us seriously. What do I mean by this, Mr. Speaker? I'm in possession of the 3 letters of the CSS who are supposed to be in this House today. And I will argue a case on which kind of CSS we should be able to censor and the ones that we should not be able to censor. Mr. Speaker, on 28th of February, 2024, the CS for transport, that is CS Kipchumba Murkomen, wrote a letter. And this letter, he did indicate, the title of it was, he was requesting for a rescheduling of appearance date before the Senate plenary. And his reasons were this. And, having accepted that he received a letter from this House dated 27th, meaning that he was responding on 28th, a day immediately after I received the letter from this Senate, he said that unfortunately the date of my scheduled appearance before the Senate coincides with a hearing in the matter of arbitration proceedings, that is the KU Railways Holding Limited versus the Republic of Kenya and the Republic of Uganda in London, which is an emerging issue that actually came. And Mr. Speaker, I'm privy to the fact that this particular letter was considered by SBC, and therefore, the understanding was reached at with this particular CS. A reasonable House as the Senate wouldn't censor this kind of CS because he has been respectful, he has wrote his letter on time, and indeed responded in a record time to the extent that SBC did deliberate on it. I don't see a problem with this, Mr. Speaker. The second is actually CS Chris Kipto, Daktari mwenyewe. It's a PS. He responded to the request for him to appear before this House. And his reason also, I might invite the Senate to consider, which was he will be out of country, that is the CS will be out of the country, attending the 56th session of the Economic Commission for Africa and Annual Conference of African Ministries on Finance this date. And Mr. Speaker, sitting on finance and budget and knowing how much we are struggling as a country to create a debt management strategy, this is a very important thing that the CS has to attend. And what impresses me is that he responded on 29th, it came to SBC, it was indeed considered, and communications were made. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have CS, Honorable Aisha Jumwa. I am privy to the fact that her letter came yesterday when the Senate already had adjourned to go home. These colleague senators had to come here today in the morning, knowing very well that we are expecting this CS. Now listen to the content of this letter, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of writing this letter is to confirm I forwarded the responses to the statement sought by Senator Amida Kibwana on gender-based violence in Kenya's political space. Further, due to conflicting schedule, I will not be able to attend the meeting scheduled to take place on Wednesday. The other colleagues, CSS, have indicated that they will desire to be here. They are requesting for a rescheduling of the meeting. And these are CS who tell you, I will not attend that meeting on the day that you want me to attend. My responses, I've given them to whoever asked me. They are not even recognized that these people are actually people who are representing the larger population. And therefore, if you find that my responses are not adequate enough, you can consider calling me back to the Senate. Mr. Speaker, Chapter 10 of the Constitution talk about three very serious C's that we as a House must then try to deliberate on. Number one, it talks about a leader who holds public office to the magnitude that Honorable Aisha Jumwa holds, and even ourselves, must be a capable leader. Number two, must be a competent leader. And number three, must be a credible leader. All those C's are disputed by the content of this letter. This is the highest level of disrespect, not only to you as a speaker, but also to this House. So I hold the view that in response to the content of the letter that we have received from Honorable Aisha Jumwa, this House must then invite the content of Standing Order number 51. And a member of this House, and I want to wish the majority side the courage, especially the majority whip, that this afternoon, go draft a motion and bring into this House for the censorship of this particular minister. Because it's the highest level of disrespect. And I've shown you very clearly why the other two ministers, I will take their responses as a senator as first, reasonable, two, respectful of the time of our speaker, and respectful of the time of this honorable House, and more importantly, accountable to the people of Kenya. But this is completely unacceptable. And I think for us to send a message of why we did make the decision to actually come with these particular standing orders, this CS must be censored. And if the majority whip does not take the courage to draft that censorship motion, and then number two, the Senator for Nandi does not follow with the courage to try and do that censor motion, Mr. Speaker, I will take the courage and come with that censor motion. So that as a House, we send a message to CSS that we are not here to waste our time. Mr. Speaker, we have got so many bills, and again, amazing bills. I've read the bill by the senator the good senator from Mombasa, Senator Miraj, who actually cares about gender issues more than what the CS has done here, in a place where violence is killing women in this country. And I need to be spending my time considering a motion, Mr. Speaker, a very good motion. And we have got so many other motions other bills that are very good in this house, that we need to be spending our time discussing the absence of CSS every single time. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I plead that this particular one needs a serious response from this house, and I hope that the majority side, led by the bullfighter, Senator Boni Aluale, will take action. But if they don't, then today or tomorrow, I will bring that motion, and I hope that the senators will reasonably find that motion very reasonable and very good for the people of Kenya and for this CSS. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kinyua.
Asante Bwana Spika kunipa fursa hii niweze kuchangia. Kuanzia mwanzo nataka kukashifu hayo mazoea ya mawaziri wetu kuitwa hapa, ilhali tayari tukiangalia katika orodha ya mambo yale ambayo tulikuwa tunapanga kufanya katika bunge hili, tayari tumeyanukuu na tunajipanga vilivyo kusudi tuweze kuyaangazia. Kwa hivyo inakashifu kitendo hicho. Lakini hata hivyo, Bwana Spika, ninataka kuungana na mwenzangu Seneta Mungatana vile alivyosema ya kwamba ukiangalia katika kanuni zetu za kudumu 51 day, Bwana Spika, ninaona kwamba tutakuwa tumetumia nguvu nyingi sana kwa yule waziri kusema ya kwamba yeye, nimesikia kulingana na wale wengi waliongea hapa, wanasema ndio waziri wa barabara alipeana sababu, waziri wa fedha ndio amepeana sababu, lakini waziri wa jinsia yeye achukuliwe hatua ambazo ni kali zaidi. Lakini Bwana Spika, nikiangalia ni vizuri vile ambavyo Senator Mungatana alivyosema ya kwamba katika SBC yetu tupange ya kwamba tukue na faini ambayo tutakayopiga waziri kabla hajachukua hili jukumu la kusema ya kwamba tunataka kumtimua, Bwana Spika. Na hata tukimpatia ile faini hata kama ni milioni 1, milioni 5 vile alivyopendekeza, Bwana Spika, hata ijapokuwa yule waziri hajafika katika jumba hili, ndio tuangalia kwamba amepeana sababu ambayo inafaa, kwa sababu pengine ameenda shughuli ambazo ni rasmi na hawezi kosa kwenda, kama nilivyokuwa nikimsikiza Senator Eddie akisema ya kwamba ndio yule waziri ama katibu wa kudumu amekwenda mahali ambapo kunafaa, na kwa sababu yako katika kamati ya fedha anasema ya kwamba ndio waziri hangeweza kuja. Kwa hivyo nataka kukubaliana na Mungatana tuwe na mfululizo mzuri, Bwana Spika, kwa sababu ndio leo amekosea. Na hata mimi nilipokuwa wakati ule mwingine waziri wa usalama nilimgoja hapa, nilikuwa nimejitayarisha kwa sababu watu wa Laikipia walikuwa na changamoto mambo ya usalama. Unapata vile vile kuna shida nyingi watu wanapitia Elgeyo Marakwet na mahali kwingine, Bwana Spika, na Baringo. Tunauliza maswali hapa na waziri anasema hataweza kuja. Lakini Spika, sababu anayokupatia unaona ni sababu inayotosha zaidi, anakuambia kumetokea maafa Lamu na hangeweza kuja, na ukiangalia vizuri unaona hayo ni mambo ambayo ni ya dharura yalitokea. Kwa hivyo tunapaswa kuangalia. Nataka kukubaliana na Mungatana 100%. Kwa hivyo kuwa tukiangalia, kwa sababu ndio anaweza kuwa ana upendo na angetaka kuja, lakini hata hivyo, Bwana Spika, tusiwe tukakejeliwa sisi kama seneti, kwa sababu tukifanya haya mazoea, Bwana Spika, tukubaliane na wao, itaonekana sisi, na wamekuwa akiangalia hivyo. Leo tukubaliane, tuseme ya kwamba ndio Kipchumba Murkomen waziri wetu asije, yule mwingine asije. Kama mawaziri hawatakuwa akija, Bwana Spika, tuondoe katika kanuni zetu za kudumu. Hatutaki mawaziri wawe wakija hapa, tukutane nao katika mazishi, tuulizie maswali kwa mazishi, ama katika kamati zetu vile ambavyo tulikuwa tukifanya. Kwa hivyo, Bwana Spika, nakubaliana na wale walioongea, lakini nikimuuliza Eddie kwa unyenyekevu mwingi, nikimuuliza kiongozi kiranja wetu Boni Halwale, waziri wetu ambaye ni waziri wa jinsia, kwa leo, Bwana Spika, kwa leo tusilete ule mswada wa kumtimua, lakini tuseme ya kwamba aambiwe amefanya makosa, Bwana Spika, na vile vile nimewasikia Bwana Spika wengine wakikurai umwandikie uandike barua ama utoe hukumu ya kusema ya kwamba dakika 30 waweze kuwa amefika hapa. Bwana Spika, ningekurai tu kwa leo tukubaliane, uambie kosa limetendeka na utoe msimamo mkali Bwana Spika, lakini kwenda mbele Bwana Spika, tusimame wima kama nyumba ya Seneti, tusije tukadharauliwa na kukejeliwa. Bwana Spika, nataka kushutumu kitendo kilichotendeka na nasema asanti kwa wewe kunipa fursa hii.
Senator Miraj.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kuweza kunipa fursa hii, na mimi nitoe hisia zangu kutokamana na kutofika kwa mawaziri wetu katika kikao chetu cha leo asubuhi. Kwa hakika rauka tumewacha vitanda vyetu ili tuweze kupata mwelekeo wa yale maswali ibuka, na sisi wengine ambao hatukuweza kupendekeza maswali tuweze kupeana maswali juu ya maswali ambayo tayari yalikuwa yameulizwa. Na mimi leo niseme kwamba sitakubaliana na maseneta wenzangu, kwa sababu mawaziri ambao hawakuweza kufika hapa ni mawaziri watatu, lakini kidole cha lawama kimenyoshewa tu waziri ambaye anatokea katika mkoa wa Pwani. Bwana Spika, ni jambo la kutamausha kuona ya kwamba sisi watu kutia miguu mambo yote. Ni mara kadha mawaziri wamekuwa wakiitwa hapa na hawafiki, lakini sioni ni kwa nini kila mtu anamnyoshia kidole cha lawama dadangu kiongozi ambaye anatoka katika mkoa wa Pwani. Kwani yeye si binadamu ama si kiongozi ambaye anaweza kufikwa na dharura?
What is the point of order, Senator Mandago? Senator Miraj just yield. What is the point of order, Senator Mandago?
Mheshimiwa Spika, ni haki Senator Miraji kudai kwamba wapwani wanaangaliwa kwa
Senator Mandago, ni kanuni gani ya kudumu ambayo unataka kuitumia katika hoja hii?
Statement of facts
na
105.
Ujue kwamba ukichagua kuzungumza lugha ya Kiswahili itabidi uendelee.
Mheshimiwa Spika, wewe ndio umenichanganya. Ni haki Senator Miraj kudai ya kuwa watu wa Pwani wanaangaliliwa, wanaonewa kwa njia ya kufutia miguu, ili hali katika serikali hii, Mheshimiwa Spika, wewe mwenyewe ni Spika ya Seneti ambaye ni chumba ambaye ni hapa house katika bunge. Waziri Aisha Juma, Mheshimiwa Spika, ni baadhi ya wale wa mama wachache wameteuliwa kwa hii serikali. Mheshimiwa Spika, Senator Miraj mwenyewe amenominatiwa kuwa kwenye hii bunge. Mheshimiwa Spika, atoe utafiti.
Senator Mandago, tafadhali tumia Kiswahili sanifu siku nyingine. Hakuna kitu kama nominatiwa, ameteuliwa.
Ameteuliwa, Mheshimiwa Spika. Kwa hivyo, je, ni haki Senator Miraj kudai haya madai ambayo ameweka kwenye chumba hii ya Seneti?
Senator Miraj.
Speaker, I rise under Constitution Article 152 4A, because there is assertion that Senator Miraj, Mheshimiwa Honorable 152 4A, each person appointed as a cabinet secretary A, assumes office by swearing or affirming faithfulness to the people and the Republic of Kenya, and obedience to this Constitution before the President and in accordance with the third schedule as provided by the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Is it in order for my good sister, Senator Miraj Abdullahi, to assert and state that, Mr. Speaker, that the reason CS Aisha Jumwa is being targeted because she comes from Coast? I think, Mr. Speaker, the President appointed Aisha Jumwa out of competency and meritocracy. It was not because she comes from Coast. It is because we believe that she would perform as a cabinet secretary. Mr. Speaker, can she withdraw, because it will not look very good in our answer and also before the eyes of Kenyans, because we don't want to see any CSS through the eyes of regions or tribe or ethnicity or religion they come from, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Miraj. Certainly, your statement is out of order. In fact, it goes to impute improper motive on your colleagues, that the reason why they are raising their concerns, why the minister is not present, is solely because she's from the coast. Kindly proceed to withdraw that.
Asante Bwana Spika, labda Kiswahili changu ndo kimewakanganya. Wacha niendelee tafadhali Bwana Spika, nilinde.
I have made a ruling.
Ndio nasema natoa kauli hiyo na naomba msamaha ikiwa hivyo ndio nilivyoeleweka.
Endelea na
nikiendelea katika kutoa hisia zangu ni kwamba Bwana Spika, mawaziri wote wameandika barua, na kweli nakubaliana na bunge hili kwamba Waziri Aisha ameandika barua kuchelewa. Lakini katika kauli za maseneta wenzangu walipokuwa wamesimama kuzungumzia kutamaushwa kwao, hakuna hata mmoja ambaye amekupa wewe rai ya kuweza kumtafuta waziri na kumuuliza ni kitu gani haswa ambacho kimemfanya yeye asiweze kufika leo hapa. Wameweza kuwaelewa mawaziri wengine na wakakubali zile changamoto ambazo wamesema wako nazo, lakini kwa nini iwe ni waziri Aisha peke yake na ni mawaziri watatu ambao sote tumerauka ili kuja kuuliza maswali? Na maswala ya jinsia waziri ni maswala ya kila mtu, si maswala ya jinsia ya kike peke yake. Kweli tulitamaushwa na yale yaliyoendelea katika ripoti ya NADCO, lakini ilibainika wazi ya kwamba viongozi wa kike tulikwenda kupitia majopo tofauti na tukapeana hisia zetu, lakini komiti ya NADCO wenyewe waliamua kwamba watawachia majukumu hayo wizara na ile kamati ambayo aliibuni ili waweze kupea mwelekeo sahihi ambao wanautaka. Kwa hivyo nataka kusema katika bunge hili la Seneti ya kwamba waziri Aisha Jumwa hakuna mkono wowote ama lengo lolote la kuweza kuondoa azma ya wanawake kuwafikia jinsia ya theluthi mbili katika katiba yetu ya Kenya. Na ningependa pia
late the Honorable CS, when she appears, to be able to shed light on that subject, because we are not here to defend any CS, and the information you're giving, it's better given by the CS herself when she appears next. Have you concluded your remarks? Thank you, Senator Miraj. Senator Wafula.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa nafasi hii. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni jambo la kutamausha sana sisi kama maseneta kurauka asubuhi na mapema, wengine kupuzilia mbali staftahi ili tuje tujadili mambo muhimu ya serikali na nchi ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, baadhi ya mawaziri ambao wamealikwa hapa ni lazima wajue kwamba kuja kwao hapa kutapeana mwelekeo na suluhisho ama kupeana matumaini kwa Wakenya. Mheshimiwa Rais amekuwa na zuru pembe mbalimbali za nchi ya Kenya akiahidi na kupeana mwelekeo kwa miradi ya maendeleo kwa Wakenya. Na miradi hii ambayo yeye hupeana mwelekeo kwayo, wale ambao lazima watekeleze ni mawaziri ambao wachache wao wamealikwa hapa na wamefeli kufika hapa. Waziri wa barabara na uchukuzi anajua fika jinsi Mheshimiwa Rais na viongozi kwa mfano wa mkoa wa Magharibi hususan Bungoma tumekuwa tunadai na kuitisha uwepo wake mashinani, ajione na aelewe ni sababu zipi zinashinikiza sisi kudai miradi ya maendeleo na barabara. Barabara ya Msikoma kwenda Mungazi, barabara kutoka Kakamega kuja Msikoma, barabara kutoka Chwele kwenda Lwahaha. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni lazima waziri huyu amke kutoka usingizi wa pono, atembee wima na ajue Kenya tunalipa ushuru. Hatuta ngoja Mheshimiwa Rais azuru atuahidi peupe mchana na waziri amejifunga kwenye mahandaki akipora na kufurahia jasho la Wakenya. Juzi nimeuliza maswali hapa Mheshimiwa Spika kuhusiana na mimba za mapema.
What is the point of order, Senator Mandaka?
Honorable Speaker, is it in order for the
have a seat, Senator Ofula, please.
Understanding on the 105, Honorable Speaker, is it in order for the Senator for Bungoma to allege that the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Roads is stealing and enjoying public resources in his office? Does he have evidence, Honorable Speaker?
Senator Wafula, you certainly need to substantiate that allegation, failure of which you may have to withdraw and apologize.
Naomba kuondoa hoja hiyo na kushinikiza Mheshimiwa Spika kwamba iwapo mfanyikazi ama waziri analipwa mshahara, anaendeshwa kwa magari ya kifahari, anatibiwa kwa pesa za mtoza ushuru, ile hali anayelipa ushuru hamuoni mtumishi wa umma popote katika kaunti hiyo, na mtumishi huyu hajalalamika kwamba analishwa na kuvishwa na kuendeshwa vizuri, bila shaka Mheshimiwa Spika anafurahia jasho la Wakenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, waziri wa jinsia, niliuliza maswali kuhusiana na mimba za mapema katika kaunti ya Bungoma. Kwa sababu ya upungufu wa sodo, upungufu wa fedha za kuimarisha biashara za kina mama na wajane, waziri huyu mpaka leo ameweka nta kwenye masikio na kinywa chake amekifunga kabisa. Tunajiuliza haya maswali kwa sababu alichaguliwa kwa mrengo wa Kenya Kwanza, na ni lazima adhihirishe uwezo wake wa kuchapa kazi kwa kutembea pembe zote na kujadili masuala haya na wananchi wa Kenya. Na haya maswali Mheshimiwa Spika, yeye na waziri wa elimu lazima watembee pamoja kusuluhisha masuala ya mimba za mapema na masuala ya wanawake na watoto katika taasisi za elimu katika nchi ya Kenya. Sasa kile tunasema sio kwamba tunaomba tafadhali waje, lazima waje. Na mimi niko tayari kujiunga na maseneta wengine kwamba kila mtu lazima wajibike. Mtoza ushuru anatoa jasho na kusaga meno kwa pesa anazotoa. Serikali inalazimisha watu walipe ushuru. Wale wanaochukua ushuru wanafurahi na kutupigia makofi kwa kulipa ushuru. Lakini tunapouliza uwajibikaji, wanatugeuka sisi, wanasema hatuwaheshimu na hatuwapi nafasi. Mimi nasema kwa niaba ya watu wa Bungoma kwamba nitadai haki kwa watu wa Bungoma, nitadai haki kwa Wakenya, ili serikali niliyoipigania na ninayoipigania ipate sifa na ishukuriwe kwa jasho na kwa kazi wanayofanya. Mheshimiwa Spika, mawaziri hawa lazima waje. Asante na nashukuru.
Senator Mundigi.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa ruhusa niweze kuchangia mambo ya ambaye ya mawaziri wataki kufanya kazi kulingana na vile tulipitisha. Nataka nikumbushe mawaziri wote, wakati Bwana Spika tulikuwa nang'ang'ana vile tutakuwa tukiwatarajia katika kikao hiki, kulikuwa nifute kwa Azimio na serikali ya Kenya Kwanza, lakini hapo tukaweza kuwa tuliweza kusucceed na tutakuwa tunawaita, na sasa kwa kikao hiki tuo kitu kimoja, hakuna mgawanyiko. Nataka kusema ametukosea aswa, mimi nikiwa ni senator wa Embu County, ambaye siku ya leo ni siku kubwa katika Embu County, ambaye governor wa Embu County mchapakazi amejikakamua na kuongea na wale wafanyikazi ambaye ni wa county, anaenda kwa kikao ya parliament ya Embu kuambia vile amefanya kazi kwa kipindi ya mwaka mmoja. Na sasa ni aibu kubwa sana kama mimi sijahudhuria pale, kwa sababu najua kwa hili kikao inafaa ni governor na senator vile kazi imefanyika. Kwa hiyo nataka kuambia waziri wa barabara na usukuzi amefanya mambo ambaye si mazuri, kwa sababu watu wa Embu County kutoka Makutano kwenda Mwea kwenda Embu Tharaka Nithi mpaka Meru wanataka kujua barabara itapanuliwa namna gani iwe kama zile zingine, kwa sababu kama kuna kaunti imetengwa ni kaunti ya Embu. Ya pili, watu wa Embu kaunti walikuwa wameniambia nisikanyange pale mpaka nikuja hapa niulize Murkomen uwanja ya ndege atatujengea lini, kwa sababu watu wa Embu wamekubali kulima, tunalima miraa, na unaona mambo ya parapara imeleta shinda, imekuwa ni mambo ya ajali, na wamekubali waweza kujengewa kiwanja ndio tuweze kupeleka miraa yetu huko ng'ambo, ndio tuwe na pesa ambaye ni pesa mkononi na mambo ya sile vitu zingine. Pia walikuwa amenituma nikikuja leo niseme kutoka Karaba kwenda Makema na kwenda Machanga, hiyo vile parapara vile itatengenezwa iwekwe lami, na pia kutoka Kiritire kwenda Karie na kwenda Kiambere, kwenda huko Kiambere huko bahari stima inatoka vile itawekwa lami, na pia mpaka kwenda upande zingine. Kwa hiyo parapara
waziri hayuko kusikia hayo yote malalamishi.
Spika angekuja, hiyo ni maswali yalikuwa imetumwa na watu wa Embu ni waulize.
Sasa hayuko.
Na hiyo, na kama hayuko lakini amekosea watu wa Embu County. Embu County ni sub county ine, tungemuuliza hiyo maswali kwa sababu tunataka miaka ambayo inakuja Embu iwe inatembea vizuri. Ya pili ni waziri wa fedha. Waziri wa fedha amekosea aswa. Sisi ni wakubwa yake katika kikao hiki ya Senate. Unajua Bwana Spika, nilikuwa nimejiandaa kumuuliza miezi tatu ambaye Senate wafanyikazi wa drivers na security hawajalipwa pesa, na alilipa wafanyikazi wa bunge. Na pia unajua hii, kama unjua Bwana Spika, ni miezi 3 maofisi yetu haijalipwa pesa na waziri wa fedha. Hiyo ingine nilikuwa nataka nimuulize, kwa kipindi ya miaka mingi walimu walikuwa na sinda, na mpaka saa hii tulienda tukafanya operesi sisi maseneta, tukaona mtu akistahavu akiwa miaka 60, ile swali ningemuuliza anakuwa barua anapata haraka, lakini unakuta tumefuatilia stresa iko na sinda. Kwa hivyo hiyo ni maswali ningemuuliza. Kwa hivyo mimi naunga mkono vile hao watu watashukuru hatua, lakini mambo ya kuatimua siko hapo. Serikali ya Kenya Kwanza haisemi mambo ya kutimuana, ni mambo ya kusemesana, ndio tuweze kuona vile serikali ya Kenya Kwanza itafanya kazi. Asante Bwana Spika.
Senator Cheptumo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also arise to add my voice to what is being discussed. Mr. Speaker, Article 124 of our Constitution mandates this House in the National Assembly to establish committees and make standing orders for the orderly conduct of the proceedings of the House. Mr. Speaker, therefore, our standing orders as the full force of the Constitution of Kenya. So that, Mr. Speaker, the provisions of Standing Order 51 all the way to 51D as the full force of this Constitution. Mr. Speaker, this is the assembly of the national leaders of our country, elected, nominated to deal with matters of concern to our counties and the county governments. And how do we do so, Mr. Speaker? We do so through the various structures in place, including asking questions to the CSS. Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to realize that the institution that sought this House to amend the standing orders, Mr. Speaker, is the President himself, who requested both National Assembly and Senate to amend the standing orders so that the CSS are able to appear and answer questions of concern to our electorate, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is paining and disappointing, Mr. Speaker, that when the time and the date is scheduled for our cabinet to appear, they don't. And Mr. Speaker, I want to agree perhaps that there are situations where they write to you as our Speaker, giving justifiable reasons why they should not appear. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed acceptable that our CS should be able to, in good time, be able to address the House why they are unable to appear. But, Mr. Speaker, my concern is that the trend is continuing to fail. So that, Mr. Speaker, my worry is that in some few, as we proceed, this avenue of these senators being able to use to deal with matters of concern to their counties is going, Mr. Speaker, to diminish. Mr. Speaker, that particular Standing Order 51D or non-attendance of cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker, the only punishment provided for there is to censure. And that is what Senator Ocheng was raising. Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with the proposal that we might have to enhance, apart from censoring a cabinet secretary, Mr. Speaker, let us enhance the punishment. And Mr. Speaker, when governors don't appear before committees of this House, Mr. Speaker, you know what they always do. They are supposed to pay a fine of 500,000, if I'm not wrong, Mr. Speaker. So it is important for this House, Mr. Speaker, to assert its authority on this position, so that a fine of an amount that can be agreed by this House should be put in our Standing Order number 51D, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the provision of moving a censor motion and to censor cabinet secretary. Mr. Speaker, Baringo, for example, the county I come from, and in all the other counties, Mr. Speaker, we are facing a lot of challenges. And Mr. Speaker, I can testify before the House that the questions we ask these CSS when they come here, Mr. Speaker, our people are keenly following, Mr. Speaker. And I am aware, even in my county, Mr. Speaker, sometimes the questions are asked here. When I go to the county, the members of the public are able to say, yes, we saw you, we heard you asking this question. So, Mr. Speaker, the value addition to our representation, the value addition to the citizens of our country, Mr. Speaker, through this procedure of cabinet ministers appearing before us, Mr. Speaker, is really, really important. And so, Mr. Speaker, I think my concern mainly is, so what from today? What happens tomorrow? I think, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank you because, Mr. Speaker, I have listened to you issuing statements compelling and telling the cabinet secretaries to appear before the House. I think you have been very clear, and even the other House has been very clear. But I think what will make the CSS, Mr. Speaker, to appear here is when we enhance the fine from this censure motion proposed by Article Standing Order 51D to a situation where they can pay fines. Mr. Speaker, we have the capacity, we have the means, we have, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity as a House to implement this. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to join my colleagues and say that it is important that you assert your authority as our Speaker and as a House, so that, Mr. Speaker, we have a solution to this situation, which is not enabling us to represent our people well, Mr. Speaker. So I join my colleagues in supporting that position.
Senator Mandago.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute in this. Honorable Speaker, first I want to join my colleagues in saying it is not in order for cabinet secretaries to absent themselves from answering questions in this House. Honorable Speaker, the purpose of this session was to make sure that the general public of the Republic of Kenya are able to get direct answers to their issues from the people responsible at the policy level, at the national government and at the county level, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, when cabinet secretaries fail to attend these sessions, they not only fail the Senate and Parliament, Honorable Speaker, but they also fail the people of Kenya. That notwithstanding, Honorable Speaker, this amendment that we brought to this House to allow cabinet secretaries to appear before us, Honorable Speaker, was a position that was developed by the Kenya Kwanza administration, led by our party leader, who is now the President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, when cabinet secretaries fail to appear before this House, they are not only failing Parliament, but they are also insubordinating the appointing authority, Honorable Speaker, because this was the position of the Kenya Kwanza administration, that the answers to the public can no longer be passed through many channels, but should come directly from the holders of the office, so that the citizens can directly get from them. This would enable the people of Kenya, Honorable Speaker, when cabinet secretaries visit various parts of this country, to be able to refer them to the question and answers they give. Honorable Speaker, this is a vision of cabinet secretaries from appearing, not only in this session, Honorable Speaker, but even before committees of Parliament, must be firmly dealt with, and I concur with my colleagues that we must invoke the necessary powers of this House to make sure the attendance is observed. Honorable Speaker, for the Cabinet Secretary for Gender, Honorable Speaker, this House was very expectant to address the matter of gender parity in government and also in Parliament, Honorable Speaker. This is a matter that has been canvassed in this country for over 30 years. There was only one opportunity available through NATCOM, Honorable Speaker, that this matter was going to be settled once and for all. I was eager myself to ask the Cabinet Secretary, who removed the gender agenda from the NATCOM menu, Honorable Speaker, so that women leaders in this country should also not be going around saying, we are fighting for women's rights, we are representing women, but the very women are undermining the success of the women. No wonder, Honorable Speaker, the old adage says, the enemy of women is actually women. And therefore, failing to appear before this House, the Cabinet Secretary for Gender has actually failed the women of this country, because this was the opportunity for her to explain what our ministry is doing in order to make sure that that agenda is kept alive and that matter is settled once and for all, because we have an administration that is keen to ensure women are involved in leadership and decision-making position in this country, Honorable Speaker. Finally, Honorable Speaker, as a House, I want to agree with my colleagues and even be persuaded further that the fines for non-appearance should be enhanced. Honorable Sotsi, Honorable Speaker, had proposed an amendment of increasing the fine to 2 million. I am now persuaded that it should even go to 5 million. This kind of contempt can only be met with a harsher punishment, Honorable Speaker. I support.
No, Honorable Onyonka Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to actually reiterate what my colleague, Senator from Senator Mandago, what he has been raising, the issue he has raised. Mr. Speaker, if you remember in 2000, I think 8 or 9, during that time I was at the National Assembly with you. And you remember when cabinet ministers, even Honorable Boni Halwale was there, and I remember Honorable Mungatana was there. Mr. Speaker, anybody who assumes that when a cabinet minister comes to make a presentation on a national matter, that maybe that minister could be wasting his time, or we who are going to listen to the contributions and discussions are actually wasting our time, is wrong. Mr. Speaker, the first thing is that the Kenyan public is interested in listening and hearing how the ministers are going to articulate government policy. Then they will be answering those questions which are critical, because running a country, Mr. Speaker, frequent times you'll have crises, you'll have matters pertaining to emergencies and all that. And then sometimes, Mr. Speaker, that is the reason I wish many of the cabinet members in the KK government would understand that them coming and answering this question, first, they continue with the historical precedent. And number two, the public is very curious and always constantly listening to what we say and what we articulate in terms of trying to solve the issues that affect our country. Mr. Speaker, I really hope that the CSS will take this House seriously, that they will in fact be, if need be, I plead that with my leader, Honorable Cherargei, and the whip, Honorable Halwale, to make a phone call to the president and tell him his ministers are misbehaving. They are letting your government down. Because we come here not because, Mr. Speaker, we are on holiday. We are dealing with matters of national importance. And when a cabinet minister comes, like the other day when Honorable Rinturi came, Mr. Minister, I was very happy because you could see he's seized of the matters, he's discussing these matters intelligently, he's coming in with some solutions. That's what we are looking for in our country, Mr. Speaker. We are not looking for drama and things which are irrelevant. And that's why I'm really pleading with the CSS and the state officers who are being asked to come and attend these meetings. Because, Mr. Speaker, if you look at our committees, the CS Finance, the Controller Budget, the Auditor General, they are always coming. When we ask them to come, they come. And their record is extremely good. Why is it that the cabinet members of His Excellency William Ruto's government abdicating their responsibility? And Mr. Speaker, I also want to plead through you and my colleagues who have access to His Excellency the President, tell him that many of these ministers are actually just randa-randaing, doing nothing, they are going on trips. Let them leave those things. Kenya has issues, let them settle down on the ground, let them intervene, let them come to our counties. Mr. Speaker, I have not seen a single CS in Kisii since I became a senator, except Moses Kuria. And yet, previously, the CSS need to move around the country. They need to come and see what is going on.
What is the point of order, Senator Munyihaji?
He's my brother, Senator Onyonka, from the great county of Kisii, in order to say that he has never seen any CS in Kisii, yet CS Machoge comes from Kisii.
Mr. Speaker, I actually wanted to re-emphasize the point. I have actually not even seen Honorable Machogu. Yes, he's in Meru, he's in Murang'a, Tharaka-Nithi, he's going to Kwale, and it's the responsibility of the office. With Honorable Machogu, I wouldn't even raise a query about it for the simple reason that he's running all over, and I see what he's doing in terms of going to the different ministries, different schools and different institutions. I think the portfolio, that is a ministry, my leader, Mr. Speaker, that I would have wished that it had a deputy minister. Because the Minister of Education is too busy, the minister is all over the place. I don't think he's really having his hands on the cake, as they say. But that is a discussion for the other day. I would like to finish, Mr. Speaker, by saying that let the cabinet ministers in the government today realize that they need to do much more, that our expectations are much more, that we know many of them are qualified and many of them can do a good job. But we also know that others are very lazy, Mr. Speaker. So I would like to reiterate what Honorable Mandago has said. That fine that Honorable Sosi has brought, we need to make an amendment. Let's change that thing to 5 million, Honorable Halwale, so that it acts as a deterrence. So that even if, Mr. Speaker, if a minister under CS knows that he's not going to be around and he has gone for official duty, it is automatic. He should write a letter which is acceptable, because we are not idiots. We know that the cabinet minister is traveled somewhere on official business, and it is important that we empathize on that. But this narrative where people just assume that, I hear this, Honorable Halwale, Mr. Speaker, frequently. Oh, the Senate is nyumba ya wazee, hakuna kitu mnafanya, there's nothing you do there. No, this House is serious. And let these ministers realize we'll be very serious with them. Because Other than them giving an apology, we are going to start fining people. We are going to start censoring people. And you know, many of them, Mr. Speaker, don't know that under Chapter 6, if somebody comes here and we censor them and ask and say that they cannot hold public office, there's nothing they'll do. The president is the only one who's going to sympathize with them. But if the president realizes that this guy is lazy, why would he save him? He just fires him, brings another one who can perform. With those very few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support and let this House be treated with respect and decorum. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, he's already concluded and taken his seat, Senator Kathuri. Honorable Senators, let us end this matter. He's already yielded, so the information certainly is. So, Honorable Senators, I have had your compelling contributions as far as the failure of CSS to attend Senate session for purposes of responding to questions. Now, these compelling contributions that you've made, they would have been relevant if they're made within the context of a motion of censure. In the absence of a motion of censure, what honorable senators are doing is merely to lament. We cannot be reduced to a house of lamentations. This is not the first. Senators are lamenting. This may not be the last. Senators will lament. You need to stop lamenting and take it to the next level. And honorable senators, the next course of action is provided for under our own standing orders. If you read Standing Order 51D, it gives the option available to this House where the House feels that a CS has abstained themselves without reasonable cause. Otherwise, for how long are you going to vent your frustrations like you've done today? We have taken 2.5 hours venting our frustrations, our pain, our disgust, our disappointment. Next week on Tuesday, if CSS don't appear, we'll continue playing the tape. The other following Tuesday, if they don't appear, you will continue playing the tape. Honorable senators, that must stop. You have the sword. The sword is not with the speaker. You have the sword under Standing Order 51D. You can elect to continue lamenting, or you can draw the sword and strike. It's up to you. Let us end it there. Next order.
Order number 8, motion. Declaration of cattle rustling and banditry as a national disaster and establishment of a special fund for victims. Resumption of debate.
Senator Cheptumo, just approach the chair, please. This is a resumption of debate that was interrupted on Wednesday, the 28th of February, 2024. At that juncture, Senator Ledama Olekina was making his contribution in form of seconding. He had a balance of 13 minutes. He is not in the House. So I will allow Senator Fatuma Dulo to take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me make my contribution to this motion on the declaration of cattle rustling and banditry as a national disaster and establishment of a special fund for victims. Mr. Speaker, I wish to support this motion because this is long overdue. Because of the menace that we have in the country as a result of cattle rustling, which has changed from the previous thinking that it was a cultural behavior among some certain pastoral communities. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the cattle rustling issues that are affecting many parts of this country, and I must appreciate the effort put in by the current CS Interior, CS Kithure Kindiki, in trying to stamp out the issue of cattle rustling in some areas. But I believe this is something that is continuing even with the kind of effort the government is putting in. And I believe the proposal by Senator Cheptumo that we must create a special fund is also valid, and also the proposal in declaring cattle rustling as a national disaster is also valid and very important. Mr. Speaker, if I may give an example of Isiolo County, you will see that the pattern has changed from cultural behavior to business. Because you can imagine animals actually taken today, within few hours, they find themselves in the market, which means it's a business now, the issue of cattle rustling. And I believe the government should be able to put in more effort in actually getting rid of cattle rustling, because you will find that still we have the issues of proliferation of small arms and weapons in our country. Most of the areas within where cattle rustling is happening, you will find that many people are having firearms that are not even licensed. We have made efforts as a country to make sure that all those who own firearms, they have licensed them. But unfortunately, still people have those firearms unlicensed. And there is government presence all over, even at the location level and sub-location levels in so many areas, which clearly means, Mr. Speaker, that there is a lot of laxity as far as dealing with cattle rustling in this country is important. And I think we have to be serious this time round and make sure that these issues are dealt with. Cattle rustling, Mr. Speaker, has affected also the social fabric within our communities. You will find, Mr. Speaker, that in many areas, the situation on the ground is affected. Communities' lives are affected. You will find that there is economic hardship, Mr. Speaker, where you can imagine some families, they have over 1,000 animals. Within a day, it's all swept away without any recourse. I believe this is really a very serious matter because the issue of pastoralism and keeping animals, it's way of life and livelihood for so many people. But unfortunately, that has never happened in our country, where we feel that serious effort is put into place to make sure that the issue of cattle rustling is dealt with. Mr. Speaker, you will find that in the areas where cattle rustling is happening, there is no development at all. Because if there is a project coming up in a certain area, people will say, oh, there is insecurity there. That is the reason why we have not even completed the projects that are proposed in those areas. And I have several examples within even my own county the areas that border Wajir, Garissa, Samburu, those areas, Mr. Speaker, and even between Isiolo and Meru, where developments are affected simply because of cattle rustling and insecurity. And that is something that actually takes people backward and brings in the issue of marginalization in this country. And we must take, Mr. Speaker, this very serious. Mr. Speaker, unemployment is also another factor that is affecting most of our youths in our country. Because you can find in a place like Isiolo, the only employment that some people can access is actually herding animals. But now, when these animals are taken away, you will find even a boy or a girl with an A, they are unable even to go to university. And if the only source of livelihood that are animals, they are taken away, and that is where they are actually getting their employment in herding, then it means these youths are actually reduced to nothing, Mr. Speaker, and this matter has to be taken very seriously. In payment of school fees, you will find that most of the pastoralists, they rely on these animals to pay their school fees for their children. Mr. Speaker, if these animals are taken away, most of our kids end up actually not even finishing their school or their schools or even getting to school because cattle rustling is affecting our communities so much. Mr. Speaker, this is actually a matter that this country has to take very seriously. And I believe the proposal of a special fund will actually mitigate some of the factors or the challenges we get as a result of cattle rustling. Because if you have 1,000 camels and they are taken away, if there is funding or a fund that is somewhere, they can be compensated, Mr. Speaker. But without fund, that means Kenyans are really suffering, especially in those areas where cattle rustling is prone. Mr. Speaker, I believe we have a solution to this problem, if only as a country we are serious. Even in budgeting process, you will see that there is serious action put into agriculture. But cattle rustling, very minimal. Because if you look at the fertilizer input, where billions are put into fertilizer actually patches, what happens to pastoral communities? Nobody is talking about even this particular, establishing a fund that has been proposed by the Senator for Baringo. Mr. Speaker, we should have equal actually support from government. If agriculture is given 2 billion, livestock should also be given 2 billion in establishing, for example, like fund or even restocking that we have discussed in various fora in this country. Mr. Speaker, I believe the effort put in by government is a short-term measure that helps the communities, but we need a serious action where issues of cattle rustling that has been resolved. Because this is a matter that is happening in most of our counties in daily basis. You can imagine we have actually tried even to bring in NPR to complement the regular police. But this is not helping at all. You see, you will find that the people who are dealing with cattle rustling, they have sophisticated firearms that are actually, even our own regular security are scared of even following up those animals when cattle rustling is taking place. Mr. Speaker, I do support this motion because it's going to give us a solution to the current cattle rustling that we have in our country, because we have tried several measures that are not actually assisting our communities. National disaster, of course, we have tried that also in issues of drought, but still we have challenges. And I think as a country, we have to focus in helping the source of livelihood for our people, because poverty level in so many areas where cattle rustling is happening is taking place. Because if you have 500 cows, they are taken away today, you end up getting nothing. Drought is actually killing our animals. Cattle rustling is taking away the animals also. So where are we going to go as pastoralist communities? This is a challenge that we need to seriously put our heads together and get up a solution for it, because unless we do that, the many challenges we have in our country, counties and the country are not going to be solved. Mr. Speaker, you will find that, in fact, in many of these areas, the issues of drugs are cropping in because animals are taken away and the people end up doing nothing. Especially in areas like Isiolo, you will find youths getting into drugs, Mr. Speaker. They end up doing nothing, and some of them, if they don't get employment and they see that cattle rustling is happening in certain areas, of course they will say, why not? Mr. Speaker, I'll stop here in support of the motion and believe that whatever we are going to propose as far as this motion is concerned, we should cascade it down so that we can be able to deal with the issues of cattle rustling in our country and also in our counties, because it's a real national disaster in our country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Fatuma Nduro, you are to second the motion so that we can open it.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I do second. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Senators, I propose the question that aware that cattle rustling ban country, concerned that the menace has since left irreparable and negative socioeconomic impact, which include but are not limited to increased number of widows, widowers, orphan children, poverty, displacement of people, leading to internally displaced persons, NDPs, disruption of education, health programs, and other economic activities owing to the destruction and or closure of educational, health, and other institutions. Further, concerned that the people living in the affected regions have been denied the enjoyment of their socio-economic and political rights as guaranteed to them under the Bill of Rights as enshrined in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the national government, through the Ministry of Interior and National Administration, in collaboration with the Council of Governors, 1, declares cattle rustling a national disaster. 2, establish a national task force on cattle rustling or banditry. To 1, investigate the causes of the rampant cattle rustling and banditry in the Sini region and the country at large. And 2, establishes the extent of suffering, loss, and damage the cattle rustling or banditry has occasioned to the communities in all the affected counties. And 3, create a special fund for mitigating the losses suffered by and in compensating all victims of cattle rustling or banditry, and set through all internally displaced persons occasioned by the menace. Senator Chalagay Samson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for this opportunity. Mine is to support this motion that was brought by Senator William Cheptumo, the Senator of the great people of Baringo. Mr. Speaker, we have waited for this motion because of the current occurrence. I know in Samburu the other day, an MCA had been killed, and even in Baringo itself, Mr. Speaker. But I want to put it to the nation that this issue of cattle rustling is not only in North Rift and South Rift alone, Mr. Speaker. This issue of cattle rustling and banditry affects over 7 counties. And let me state them so that for the record and Kenyans to understand, so that it does not appear we are discussing issue of either only Samburu or Baringo. Mr. Speaker, it affects 7 counties. That's a population of 8.8 million Kenyans are affected by this menace of insecurity through cattle rustling and banditry. And that is Baringo, Elgeyo Marakwet County, Turkana County, Isiolo County, Marsabit County, Laikipia County, and finally West Pokot County, Mr. Speaker. So this is like a half of the country, Mr. Speaker. So this is a national disaster in its form and design, Mr. Speaker. It is unfortunate that this has been commercialized. Cattle rustling has been commercialized into a criminal enterprise that continue to deny Kenyans from these 8 regions plus or 8 counties plus or more than 8.8 million, Mr. Speaker, that continue to suffer because their livelihood, Mr. Speaker, is cattle. It's livestock, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, and even Meru, sorry, I forgot Meru. Also, I saw the CS of Interior was with members, colleagues over the weekend. Meru also has been affected, Mr. Speaker. So this issue, and sometimes also Nandi and Kisumu, so it is an issue that is cross-cutting, Mr. Speaker. Cattle livestock theft, I'm told even in some parts of this country, in Western Kenya, people are also forced to close their cows and sleep with them in rooms because of also livestock theft. So this cattle livestock theft, cattle rustling and banditry is a national disaster, Mr. Speaker. What we want to ask our brother, Professor Senator Kithure Kindiki, Majority Leader Emeritus and the Minister of Interior, is to declare this a national disaster, Mr. Speaker, and create a special fund. And it is within the rights, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the last 6 months, I think in 2023, we lost through cattle rustling and banditry over 600, over 100 civilians, Mr. Speaker, and 16 police officers. So there are many families who today they are without their sons, their daughters, their children, their spouses, Mr. Speaker, because of trigger-happy banditry, Mr. Speaker. These regions have been made a playground of criminals, organized criminals, Mr. Speaker. And that is why even when you look, I had sponsored a bill on the livestock, against livestock theft, Mr. Speaker, of theft of livestock produce and theft. Because we were targeting, Mr. Speaker, we need to hit, to punish. Because apparently, Mr. Speaker, the financiers of this well-organized criminal enterprise in these regions that I've mentioned, Mr. Speaker, and are people who are staying in Nairobi. And they are just using innocent young men and women who have been transformed into criminals to steal livestock, and they end up in the most of the plates that we are eating in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could we unknowingly be financing cattle rustling and banditry? Because most of these livestock are being slaughtered here in Nairobi and other major towns. And we buy and enjoy the sweet meat, thinking that this is maybe that cow or that animal has been stolen, that livestock, and being slaughtered, Mr. Speaker. So I think this is a menace that we must, Mr. Speaker, because what happens, you saw in Baringo the other day, it was a sad situation where a body, and I saw our senator from Baringo was in that funeral, where the body was being forced to be escorted by a paramilitary, Mr. Speaker, to the resting place, the former head teacher, Mr. Speaker, who was, coincidental, Mr. Speaker, it is a sad story, and I know media have carried that story, where that teacher, Mr. Speaker, was shot in 1979 when he was young to be blind by a bullet of a cattle rustler. He was also killed by the same bullet the other day, Mr. Speaker, and he was buried. Even when he was supposed to rest in peace, the bandits and cattle rustlers were shooting all over. And the funeral had to be conducted. I was thinking, are we still in Kenya? Is this Gaza? Is this Ukraine, Mr. Speaker? Is it Pakistan, Mr. Speaker? Because if it has reached a level where somebody needs to be escorted to be buried, Mr. Speaker, therefore this is a clear pointer that this must be declared as a national disaster, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with the recommendation, Mr. Speaker. The only threat in that region, and Senator Dula has captured it very well, is insecurity or livestock banditry and cattle rustling, Mr. Speaker, sir, and also drought. So I empathize with the people from this region. If they are not suffering from cattle rustling, they are suffering from the drought, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we want to agree, even on the issue of livestock insurance cover, we must provide, Mr. Speaker, as a way forward. So that when people in Meru lose their lives or lose their livestock, we must give insurance to the lives that we have lost, unfortunately. and also give cover to the animals through livestock restocking and livestock insurance cover, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the third point that I wanted to make, Mr. Speaker, is on the issue, what is the way forward, apart from establishing this fund? My proposal is that we need to immediately reopen county security roads, Mr. Speaker. During Kibaki era, there was this road, if I can get right, from Ginya to Chemalingot, that would happen. If that area, Mr. Speaker, is open all the way to Turkana with tarmac, all these other parts are open through infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, through county roads. I can assure you, when those places are open, Mr. Speaker, it will always open that area to civilization. And what that means, the issue of cattle or insecurity in that region will come down, Mr. Speaker. And that is why many people have taken the advantage of ignorance of our people in those areas to take advantage and use it to transform into a criminal enterprise, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, apart from roads, we need to look at the education. We need to improve in infrastructure of education, Mr. Speaker. Because when you open up, when people go to school, when people from those areas that are affected by cattle rustling and banditry, Mr. Speaker, when they go there, Mr. Speaker, and they go schools, we open schools, it will allow us to open their minds, open their hearts, Mr. Speaker, spiritually and through education, so that, Mr. Speaker, they are able, Mr. Speaker, to be part of the transformation of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another number 3 is to call upon the national and county government, Mr. Speaker, to take affirmative action, especially in those areas. I expect these county governments that I mentioned from Baringo, Elgeyo Marakwet, Turkana, Isiolo, Marsabit, Laikipia, West Pokot, Meru, who are affected by the livestock menace, Mr. Speaker, to make an affirmative action. We want Meru County government to make affirmative action through employment, by ensuring that we employ youth specifically from those areas so that we open up them, Mr. Speaker, by building more ECD centers, vocational training centers in those areas so that we give the young people who are being misled, Mr. Speaker, to participate in cattle rustling and banditry and an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to ensure they are in a position to be part of the transformation of this country, Mr. Speaker. Even the national government, I want to challenge, there should be affirmative action, especially when we are recruiting any state officers, civil servants, the police, the GSU, the military, among others that are being hired by the national. We must make affirmative action. So even as we talk, I want to challenge Senator Cheptumo, even as we do the national fund to compensate on the victims, he should also amend this motion to include the county governments must brief the Senate. What affirmative action have they done in this Baringo, Elgeyo Marakwet, Turkana, Isiolo, Marsabit, Laikipia, West Pokot, and even your county, Mr. Speaker. And we are lucky today that we are sitting when we are discussing this motion, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, there must be a way of ensuring that we do, Mr. Speaker. Point number 4, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of water. We need to ensure water is taken to those areas, Mr. Speaker, so that we can do irrigation. I know the President has been pushing for environmental conservation and planting of more than 15 billion trees, Mr. Speaker. I want to challenge that we increase and ensure access to water, Mr. Speaker, so that we can do irrigations on those areas. Mr. Speaker, can you believe in most of those areas it's very fertile? If you are to give them water to irrigate their crops, I can share with the issue of food security, Mr. Speaker, we shall be able to address the food security because that area, Mr. Speaker, in fact, is good for fruits because it is very hot, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of minerals, Mr. Speaker, can you believe most of these regions, I know there is GDC in some of those areas. There are many minerals, Mr. Speaker, in those areas. Most of these people do not want those areas to be open so that exploration and minerals can be mined for the benefit of those areas, Mr. Speaker. And you know, under the Mining Act in the local content, when you get the revenue, 70% goes to national government, 20% goes to county governments, and 10% goes to the local community under Community Development Agreement in the Mining Act of 2015. So I want to challenge Senator Cheptumo to also follow it up with the Ministry of Mining. Let us ensure we do mineral exploration, oil exploration, Mr. Speaker, but ensure, because it has a dangerous soft underbelly, Mr. Speaker, by ensuring that when we do mining and exploration of minerals in these stricken areas, Mr. Speaker, it gives them opportunity to get value for the local community, Mr. Speaker. Because even where I come from, issue of Kareba gold mine, Mr. Speaker, We had problems where community in Chemase was not getting the local through community development agreement, where you have communities through 70-20%. 70 to national, 20 to county, and 10% to the local community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to challenge county governments in closing so that I allow my colleagues. Let us, Mr. Speaker, ensure we make sure the money that we devolve is used for the intended purposes, Mr. Speaker. Let us all, Elgeyo Marakwet, Baringo, and other areas, even in Meru, in Laikipia, let us ensure resources work. Mr. Speaker, if there is development, this menace of cattle rustling and banditry will stop if we ensure those areas are open, Mr. Speaker. So I want to challenge county governments, Mr. Speaker. I have seen a number of them because they call hardship, Mr. Speaker. For example, most of these counties are counties that are struggling because of where they are, but they get a lot of money. Mr. Speaker, are you aware Meru, Turkana, among other, of course, outside Kakamega, Garissa, Isiolo, and many other areas, Mr. Speaker, get a lot of money, over more than 15 billion, while Nandi, for example, we get 7.5 billion. But when you ask questions, Mr. Speaker, they find it uncomfortable, Mr. Speaker, and I want to challenge, because I saw individuals from Garissa County trying to answer me for raising questions, Mr. Speaker, about non-access to water, for example, in Garissa, where we have only water Bausa that supplies more than close to 1 million people in Garissa, for example, Mr. Speaker. There is no water in Garissa. When you go to Garissa Health, Mr. Speaker, former Provincial General Hospital, there is no water, Mr. Speaker, and I question it. I was shocked that the county government and the county governor sponsored a lot of news media item over the weekend while I was busy not serving the people, Mr. Speaker. So we must call out, and I want to tell all governors, including governor from Kisii, that a senator is not only to oversight his own county. You can decide to oversight Nandi. We have right to oversight all 47 counties, Mr. Speaker. So I want to tell those people who sponsored media stories through the governor of Garissa and the county government and the water provision that I will not be intimidated, just like the rest of the senators. We shall do oversight. And that 12 billion that was allocated to Garissa in the last financial year, 2022-2023, they must provide water to the people of Garissa. They must provide health care to the people of Garissa. They must provide bursary. We are aware of the allegations that they are buying houses here in Isili and Kilifi. We have allegations, and I want to challenge ESCC and DCI to look at the most county governments that they are misusing and misappropriating funds to their advantage, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask, instead of buying media spaces, instead of bribing, allegations of bribing and buying media to respond and sponsoring ordinary wananchi to answer Senator Cherargei, Mr. Speaker, they should be busy providing water to the people, bursary, roads, so that we can fight this menace of drought, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore with those very, very remarks, we want to thank Senator Cheptumo for this wonderful motion. I hope to see it in fruition, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I beg to support. And I hope our brother Senator Kithure Kindiki and COG should come on board so that we ensure that we adopt this report of the motion. Asante sana, Mheshimiwa Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Chalgei. Senator Chalgei, you have actually proposed several amendments to the motion. This motion is now a property of the Senate of Kenya. It does no longer belong to Senator Cheptumo alone. So what you are proposing, you can even go ahead and also amend this motion to suit your thinking. So nothing is stopping you from making those amendments yourself. Of course, in agreement with the move of the motion. Next is Senator Okoiti Andrew Omtata. Oh, sorry, just a minute, Senator Omtata. Let us first acknowledge the visiting students from Mamangina University College in Kiambu County. I would like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this morning of visiting students from Mamangina University College, Leadership and the Politics Club. The delegation comprises 40 students who are in the Senate for a one-day academic exposition. Honorable Senators, in our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate, and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. If I look at the membership present now, and the senator for Kiambu County is not around, the member who is close to these university students is none other than Senator Lemaletian Ezena. So I want to give you this opportunity to welcome them, maybe in 1 minute also.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I join the rest of my colleagues and the Honorable Chair in welcoming comrades to the Upper House of Parliament. I want to assure them that their voice is fully represented in this House through me. And I want them to take a very keen note at the contributions being made by members here. You are very lucky because Kiambu County is very cosmopolitan, and I think it's within the municipality. Is it? Yeah? Metropolitan, sorry. Metropolis from the People's Senator. Feel at home. I hope you learn a lot. I hope you can see how the honorable members contribute. You know that Parliament has 2 houses. You're old enough to know that. The lower house, which is the National Assembly, and the upper house, which is the Senate. Gain from the wisdom of the contributions here, and also know that you have rights as citizens to bring petitions to the floor of this House. Like currently, I'm holding several petitions on mental health, and recommendations from various groups of young people on mental health, education, and climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's proceed. Senator Omtata, proceed.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this very important motion. I'll not repeat what has been stated in terms of the devastating effects of this crime called mischaracterized as cattle rustling. An important thing I would like to say, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to locate this thing in the law. Cattle rustling is mischaracterized to the extent that even the law enforcement cannot deal with it. It should be in the penal code, and the same sanctions that apply to robbery with violence should apply to this particular activity. It's robbery with violence, nothing else. People die, a lot of property is destroyed, and people are snatched their property. So, to give it a sexy title like cattle rustling is really a way of getting away from the real issue. It's no longer, there's no relationship that used to happen in the traditional days when somebody could raid maybe with a spear and whatever to steal a few cattle for balanced issues. I don't deny that there's a cultural dimension to it in certain areas, because when I was in Southern Sudan some time back, and I was dealing with the Catholic missionaries, I came across one missionary with a story that goes like, he used to have a very, very dedicated choir master, who was a young man who had gone to school. The guy was not married. Then one evening, the guy turns up in war regalia and comes to the priest and asks the priest for a blessing in a group of warriors. Then the priest asks, what is all this about? He said it was time for him to get married, and he had come with his age mates for a blessing from the priest because they were going to raid the Turkana of Kenya for cattle. There's a girl whom he had identified, but they were demanding a very high price of cattle that he did not have. So the only way you could get that girl was to go and raid cattle from the Turkana in Kenya. So if a choir master was doing that, maybe you could see the depth with which this thing may be as a cultural activity or drawn by cultural activity. But what is important is that they were coming to raid cattle from Kenya. The question is, why are our borders porous?
because this crime of cattle rustling is an international crime. It's an organized international crime. People, criminal networks, sometimes use very advanced technologies to track information about where the cattle are, what markets are available, and stuff like that. And so, they're able to move around and get animals and take them to markets and they sell and dispose of. Secondly, when you look at our laws, you'll find that there's no law requiring identification of cattle or goats or sheep or any of these domestic animals at slaughterhouses and at markets. You'll go to a market and buy and sell an animal with no provisions for the identification of that animal. In my own local area, if you go on a market day, you'll go to the market and buy an animal. There's no requirement for any certification from where the animal came from to that market. They just exchange them the way they sell shirts. I think the time has come for us to come up with a law that will ensure that animals are traceable to their owners. If you are coming to sell an animal, it should be possible to trace the owner of that animal at the point of sale. That one might also help reduce the issue. The other thing I would like to address is that there is a protocol on the prevention, combating, and eradication of cattle rustling in East Africa. The last time I checked, only Uganda had signed that protocol. If you look at the protocol, it provides very, very good measures for containing cattle rustling across the borders, across international borders, and within the borders of a sovereign state like Kenya. So the failure to ratify this kind of thing also tells us that we are not serious with eradicating cattle rustling. And this was a thing that came up from the community and went beyond just the members of this East African community. It's supposed to cover 15 countries in the eastern region where there's rampant cattle rustling. So I would ask myself, how serious is our government, or what is the commitment of our government to ending this menace when they cannot even sign on protocols that are designed to tap into international networks to address this problem? The other question I have, I've always asked myself, Uganda has largely contained cattle rustling through brute force. When somebody picks up a gun to go to another community to rob and kill and spoil, he is not a man to be handled or a woman to be handled with kid gloves, but I doubt whether women are very active in that area, although you have to be gender sensitive. So if somebody picks up a weapon to go and rob, in some country, in Uganda, if we are arrested, you are court-martialed because you are an armed combatant. They don't handle you with the kid gloves. Secondly, the response of the authorities is severe. The monopoly of violence must always stay with the state. I don't understand how the Kenyan state has lost the monopoly of violence in these areas where we have got rampant cattle rustling. The other day I read in the newspaper that the police air wing helicopters have been grounded because of mismanagement and other things. So we can only the police can only work on land. I would expect the police to be armed with helicopter gunships so that when there is an attack, they go and strafe the area with bullets. The state must maintain the monopoly of violence. But the Kenyan state has chosen to handle this problem with kid gloves. And it would be a situation whereby the elite and maybe people control the deep state are the people who are behind the cattle rustling. Because how do you steal almost 1,000 cows and nobody sees them? It's practically impossible. I would expect a police air wing or the anti-stock theft to be armed with the attack helicopters. So that when these people take the animals, go and shoot them plus the animals. Do that 2-3 times, they will get scared. But these kid gloves of making the Minister for Interior, giving us pronunciation, trying to give threats to us, soprano voice, does not add up. His body language does not even convince you that the man is serious. Let us see action, because lives of Kenyans are being lost, property of Kenyans is being destroyed, and we cannot continue the way we have been continuing. The blame lies squarely at the Kenyan state. It cannot demonstrate any single action it has taken to demonstrate that when you come to violence, we are the masters of violence. I don't see. And unless we get to the point whereby the state has a monopoly of violence, armed gangs will keep roaming around and killing people. We don't want to be Haiti, where the state has lost the monopoly of violence to gangs. And we don't act in time. These so-called cattle rustlers can morph into other things. Because they'll be heavily armed, they can decide to declare a republic of their own within the area. What will we do? Let us nip this thing in the bud. Let us crush and destroy the cattle rustlers. And my proposal is that we should not be talking of setting up funds and whatever. There is already a provision in law for compensation for victims of crime. And so the state should be held accountable to compensate victims of crime. I support the motion, and I call on the Kenyan state to step up to the plate and up its act. I have not seen anything that has been done to fight cattle rustling. The so-called disarmaments end up nowhere. Sometimes they create an imbalance. You disarm one community, you leave another one armed, and the armed community comes to run roughshod over the community that has been disarmed. So with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank you for the opportunity you have given me to address this House, and I support the motion, and I thank Senator Cherargei.
Senator Mtata, before you leave the floor,
yes, Mr. Speaker,
I want to question you. Standing on the 101.3, it shall be out of order to use offensive or insulting language, whether in respect of senators or other persons. So in your contribution, you have stated that a certain individual, a certain citizen of this republic, has a soprano voice. So can you kindly withdraw that statement?
It's a statement.
Substantiate whether you are able to.
Mr. Speaker, sir, you can't substantiate the obvious. It's a statement of fact, a descriptive statement of fact. It's not an insult. It's a statement of fact. But if it is offensive, then I withdraw it and apologize.
Proceed and conclude.
So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have not seen any action that the state has taken other than issuing baseless threats against bandits to restore the balance of arms where the state has the monopoly of violence over criminal gangs. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank you for the opportunity and for the guidance. And I was standing with Senator Cherargei, the Lion of Nandi, for the great input he has given us. I also thank Senator Dulo, the Queen of Isiolo, for the informative information she has given us, and I support the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
God bless us.
Next is Senator Joe Nyutu, Moranga Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity. And I rise to support the motion by Senator Cheptumo, who has just gotten back to the House. Mr. Speaker, right from the wording of this particular motion, that, Mr. Speaker, there are very many negative socio-economic impact on the things that, on the lives of the people affected by banditry and cattle rustling, Mr. Speaker. These are very big social problem, Mr. Speaker, where we have people displaced, where we have orphans that would otherwise have been children with their parents, Mr. Speaker, where we have widowers, Mr. Speaker, and this is a matter that needs to be taken very seriously by the government, and that is why I rise to support that we declare this motion that states that seeks declaration of cattle rustling and banditry as a national disaster, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, the Honorable C.S. Kindiki, for what he has, for his efforts, Mr. Speaker, that he has shown over the short period of time that he has been Cabinet Secretary in this particular ministry. Mr. Speaker, we have seen him even visit the grounds where these offenses happen, Mr. Speaker. And this is a job well done. We see a coordinated Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Speaker. But I think there are many other things. There is a lot of room for improvement, Mr. Speaker, where if the CS and the ministry was going, Mr. Speaker, to improve on some of the suggestions that we have, and I'm glad that you have advised that we can introduce amendments to this particular motion, Mr. Speaker. I think one of the challenges that we have been having in trying to arrest banditry and cattle rustling, Mr. Speaker, is where we send the security forces. We send our police officers, Mr. Speaker, and it has been established that most, I don't know why this tradition has been there, that the askaris that we send to these particular areas, Mr. Speaker, sometimes are newly recruited and trained askaris, newly posted askaris, Mr. Speaker, where they find the terrain very challenging, Mr. Speaker. I think I would want to suggest that they form a special group of askaris, Mr. Speaker, and basically and mostly those drawn from those areas. We have askaris, we have young men and women that have grown up in these bandit-prone areas, Mr. Speaker, and who are very conversant with this type of terrains that we have in those particular areas, Mr. Speaker. I would want to propose and suggest to the CS that they can pick a special, they can make a special wing, basically comprising officers who have grown up in those areas, Mr. Speaker, so that they will be able to handle that terrain. They'll be able, Mr. Speaker, to be superior in handling these bandits, Mr. Speaker. And I think that is something that is doable because we can be able to identify where people come from even when they are serving in the forces or in the service, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, banditry and cattle rustling over the years has appeared like something that cannot be arrested. But Mr. Speaker, I remember that some years back we had a problem with a group that was calling itself Sabaot Land Defense Force, SLDF, Mr. Speaker, that gave this country, and especially Kenyans living around Mount Elgon, a very great problem for a number of years, Mr. Speaker. And when enough was enough, and the army was deployed to go and arrest that problem, Mr. Speaker, it took only a few months, and the leader of that particular gang was actually killed, Mr. Speaker. I do not know why the leaders from these areas do not support or are always opposed to to the deployment of the armed forces to go and arrest that particular menace, Mr. Speaker. I think this is something that should be highly thought about so that we do not have a perennial problem. This is something that can be done. This is a problem that can be arrested, Mr. Speaker, and I suggest that we look at the possibility of posting or deploying the army, Mr. Speaker, to go and arrest this problem, Mr. Speaker. I have listened to Senator Cheralge indicating, and I think I concur with him, that there could be people, sometimes even in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that support this cattle rustling for the commercial benefits that they get from this, Mr. Speaker. I think we should have a special investigative team, Mr. Speaker, to investigate and see who funds, if at all, these rustlers, Mr. Speaker, so that whoever it is, we cannot continue having our people killed. We cannot continue seeing our people lose their life investments in their livestock that they keep, Mr. Speaker, just because there are some people that could be powerful somewhere that support this particular problem, Mr. Speaker, or this banditry. Mr. Speaker, let us establish a special investigative group that will investigate, establish who funds these people, who supports these people, who gives these people protection, political or otherwise, Mr. Speaker, so that we can be able to deal with this problem once and for all. Most of these animals, Madam Speaker now, most of these animals, when stolen, they are transported to big towns and cities where they are slaughtered and sold as meat to city residents, Madam Speaker. I think we need to tighten the noose. We need to have some very good programs on transportation of animals. We should be able to establish the source of animals transported on a daily basis, Madam Speaker, so that if we have reason to believe that the animals being transported are animals that could have been stolen, then I think we can have an intervention before these animals reach the market. Because if there was not going to be any market for these stolen animals, then of course, Madam Speaker, we would not have people stealing these animals, and that way we would be able to arrest this problem, Madam Speaker, because these animals are not, once stolen, they are not kept by the bandits. They are transported for slaughtering. We should be able to come up with a method of seeing to it that all the animals in transit are animals that have been acquired genuinely, Madam Speaker. These bandits always have some very sophisticated firearms. We do not manufacture firearms in this country. The last time I checked, we were not manufacturing firearms. How do these firearms get into our country, Madam Speaker? I think that is a question that we need to ask ourselves. How do these firearms get into our country? I mean, we have only manned entry points. Why do these firearms enter our country? Who influences this illegal entry? Because there must be some collusion somewhere. It cannot be that these firearms just get into the country. I think we also need to investigate and know who colludes with the illegal importers of firearms that eventually get into the hands of these bandits, Madam Speaker. I think I want to really support the idea of establishing a special fund to deal with this matter, because we need to put up schools in these areas. We need to put up hospitals in these areas, Madam Speaker. We need to finance these people. We need to sensitize the people living in these areas, Madam Speaker, so that they can be able to know when a young man is growing and when they have been taken to school, they should be sensitized. They should know that opportunities exist. That if you go to school, you do not have to rely on banditry in order for you to be gainfully employed, Madam Speaker. And I think this funding will be of utmost importance. We need to know, we also need to train our people that we do not, to also carry out, rearing of animals in a better way, in a way that can also be profitable to them. And I think this fund will go a long way if established as proposed in this particular motion. And Madam Speaker, I can see the yellow light from the clerk's desk. I do not want to continue, but I want to say that this is one of the most progressive motions that we have had in this particular house in the recent past, and I want to thank Senator Cheptumo for this well-thought motion, and to which we will be introducing amendments as advised by the Deputy Speaker. Madam Speaker, I support this motion. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Joe Nyoto. Senator Beatrice Akinyi Ogola.
Madam Speaker, as I rise to support the motion on cattle rustling and banditry, Madam Speaker, I want to say from the onset that banditry in itself and cattle rustling is an act of criminality from the word go. Madam Speaker, it looks like these are organized criminal activities, and that specifically just points to an organized way of doing business. And to me, Madam Speaker, it is somebody's business. Madam Speaker, sometimes back, when there were issues of piracy in the ocean and our water bodies, somebody made a remark that convinced me that pirates cannot survive and do their business without support from the ground. And Madam Speaker, I relate that with the issue, the criminality of banditry and cattle rustling. Madam Speaker, it is a criminal and must be dealt with just the way other organized criminal activities are dealt with. Madam Speaker, the act of banditry and cattle disrupts lives. There are activities that disrupts livelihoods of the people. They result in loss of life. They disrupt life, Madam Speaker, to the extent that schools cannot go on. And Madam Speaker, with the policy we have in this Republic of Education for All, it means that there are certain regions that do not have their school calendars going on as expected. And Madam Speaker, finally, they do the same examinations and they are rated just like other Kenyans. And Madam Speaker, that is something that must concern us as a people, as leadership, as parliament, as the executive. Madam Speaker, because of this criminality, and as I've said, schools are disrupted. Madam Speaker, health services to the people are disrupted, because once they are displaced, it means that the people who have been displaced cannot get the usual services that they get. So what happens to them when they fall sick, Madam Speaker? What happens to the ones that go to school? What happens to their normal businesses, Madam Speaker? And Madam Speaker, because banditry and cattle rustling results in displacement of people. Madam Speaker, when even personnel are, their advertisement, even in the local county governments in those areas, or the national government as a whole, there are people who always fear going for jobs in those areas. And Madam Speaker, that basically means that the people where cattle rustling and banditry is prone lacked the skilled, the equitable skills that other regions get from all Kenyans, Madam Speaker, because in this republic, anybody can work elsewhere. Madam Speaker, I've often heard, even in our villages, young men who'd want to venture in going and work in those areas, they are hesitant when adverts are made. And Madam Speaker, that means these skills, these people in those areas cannot get the required skills that they should be having. Madam Speaker, cattle rustling, as I've said, being a criminality, I want to state that investigations must be done to unearth the masterminds of these activities. Because to me, Madam Speaker, banditry should be treated as an extreme act of criminality. And so there must be investigations from the investigative arm of this government so that the masterminds of these criminal gangs are unearthed. And Madam Speaker, just as we have a policy where proceeds from even criminal issues like money laundering are mapped and returned back to the state, why can't investigations be done? Proceeds from such acts of banditry and cattle rustling must be mapped, and declarations must be made about those proceeds so that they are sunk back into the economy of this country. And Madam Speaker, as the people behind these criminal activities are mapped, I want to suggest, Madam Speaker, that they must also be named and shamed. Madam Speaker, because they are causing great loss to our people, they are creating great disruption of activities to our people, and so other than investigations being done, these people must be named, and Madam Speaker, they must be shamed, and Madam Speaker, they must also face they must also be prosecuted. They must face the law. Madam Speaker, in areas where in my constituency, there has been a practice where people wake up one day and we just find sheep, goats, and cattle knifed in the middle of the night. That has been a usual occurrence sometimes back in my constituency in Dewa. And those are the criminal gangs we are talking about. Because what would be the purpose of such acts of criminality? And Madam Speaker, we are saying, as I support this motion, we want to say that the reasons for such activities must also be brought to book. Madam Speaker, the issue of cattle rustling, other than areas that Senator Sheptumo mentioned, and other senators have mentioned, there has been the usual practice of the conflicts around Sondu and Nyakach. And Madam Speaker, when you look at them, sometimes they're not just have an objective of picking the cattle, but they have deeper objective of causing hostilities between communities that have otherwise lived very peacefully. Madam Speaker, an example of Sondu we have given, we have the Luos and the Kalenjins that have lived there. They have intermarried. They go to the same market. They live happily every day. They trade together. They intermarry. They marry their girls. We marry their girls. But one day, on a night, you just wake up and find people have stormed the other community and causing unnecessarily conflict. And that is why I say, Madam Speaker, those are acts of criminality. Those are acts that must be investigated. And Madam Speaker, as a country, we cannot keep on talking about this banditry, about this cattle rustling, government to government. When, Madam Speaker, in this country, we are convinced that our investigative arm is very skilled. Why is it that they are not able to unearth the mastermind of these criminal activities? Why is it that this is encouraged? Is it because somebody benefits from this criminality? And if somebody is benefiting from this criminality, Madam Speaker, those people should be investigated, their names picked out, and as I've said, they must be named and shamed. Madam Speaker, the other idea that is always surrounding this criminality is that the proceeds from these criminal gangs are invested elsewhere in the country. Just before me, the Honorable Senator Rage, I think, mentioned about certain development coming up in our urban centers, and it is assumed those are proceeds from those areas. Madam Speaker, this is a country of values. We are talking about hard work. We are talking about determination. We are talking about, as I've said, hard work. How do we allow proceeds of such criminal activities to be the sources of development in some of these urban centers? What are we teaching to our young people? Look at the public gallery, and I see very young, promising Kenyans seated there. But here we are saying there are people who pick proceeds from such criminal activities and invest back into our societies. Madam Speaker, because of the lives that have been lost on banditry, because of the lives that have been lost on castle rustling, because of the injuries that have been caused, Madam Speaker, because of the disruption of the education standard institutions and activities in those prone areas, because of the disruption of health services in those areas, Madam Speaker, I support that banditry, castle rustling is an act of criminality, and so must be investigated, and Madam Speaker, it should be declared a national disaster. Madam Speaker, I support.
Thank you, Senator Beatrice. Senator Danson Mungatana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to support this motion. Madam Speaker, this motion seeks, number one, to declare that cattle rustling is a national disaster. Number two, it seeks that to establish a national task force. Number three, it seeks that we create a special fund. Madam Speaker, in debating this motion and in supporting this motion, I wanted to ask the Honorable member, sponsor, the Honorable Chair of Defense, Senator, who has brought this, to also think of another angle to these issues of cattle rustling. Madam Speaker, it is true that previous speakers have mentioned certain counties. They have mentioned Samburu, they have mentioned Baringo, Elgeyo Marakwet, and so on, that have the highest incidences of cattle rustling. Madam Speaker, even if we declare this a national disaster, even if we set up a national task force, even if we set up a special fund to deal with this cattle rustling, Madam Speaker, there is another issue, which is the regional cooperation that is required for us to be able to truly deal with this menace. Madam Speaker, cattle rustling has emerged and it has transformed itself from being a mere cultural practice, Madam Speaker, into an international organized crime. And Madam Speaker, the players are securing huge profits from supporting and sponsoring this criminal activity. It is no longer, Madam Speaker, the normal cultural thing that used to happen in them days, that people would go to try and get some cattle from somewhere so that they can pay bride price. Madam Speaker, it has become a business, not just national business, but an international crime business. In fact, it's organized crime, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the efforts that our government has done through the current Minister for internal security. Madam Speaker, the minister has been seen there many times in that entire belt, making all efforts to be present and making declarations. But Madam Speaker, even if you disarm one community, only one community on the side of Kenya, and then you don't disarm the other communities on the neighboring countries, Madam Speaker, we will be doing a zero-sum game. Madam Speaker, it is time that we really started thinking about regional cooperation. It is time that we really put a thought into what 3 internal security ministers from Uganda, from up here in Ethiopia and Kenya, when they meet at those borders, what they will be able to achieve as a team, as opposed to when we are acting alone, as opposed to when we are putting measures alone. Because when we do that, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, in fact, what happens is some of our communities which are bordering in those areas, their guns are taken away, their protection capacity is taken away, and so the other side who are doing cross-border raids are able to come in and do the very criminal activity now against us as Kenyans. Madam Speaker, something needs to be done in terms of regional cooperation. Having served and still serving as the head of delegation of this parliament and to the Pan-African, I have seen the strength of coming together. When African nations come together, Madam Speaker, whether be it in the southern area or in the southern caucus, the eastern caucus, western or northern caucus, a lot of things can happen. Recently, Madam Speaker, and the recent development, we have seen regional cooperation when we are proposing the candidacy of Raila Odinga as African Union Commission Chair. Madam Speaker, you have seen he himself speaking to the media, telling people that he has been able to meet various heads of state and he has the support of the Kenya's head of state. Madam Speaker, the kind of effort and energy that is being put towards the candidacy of one person, Madam Speaker, is not the kind of effort and energy that we are seeing in the region to eliminate things that affect normal people like cattle rustling. Madam Speaker, if presidents can meet to discuss candidature, and which is very important, Madam Speaker, if presidents can meet to discuss candidature of one person, I don't see why presidents cannot meet, Madam Speaker, to discuss the issue of the protocol, Madam Speaker. This protocol has been there since 2008. 2008. They will meet to discuss climate change. They will meet to discuss the normal Eastern African region issues. In fact, the Eastern African Parliament is in session here in Nairobi. But Madam Speaker, cattle rustling is not an issue. Why? Because it has